The Visara crown hung in the void like a jeweler's masterpiece suspended against the bruising purple sway of the gas giant below. It was a colossal torus, a ring of durasteel and crystal that circled the planet with an arrogance that only an empire 10,000 years old could muster. From a distance, it looked serene, a halo of civilization in the dark. Up close, it was a screaming, chaotic mess of commerce, desperation, and blinding neon light. Jace leaned against the railing of the commercial transport dock, letting the vibration of the maglev trains rattle through the soles of his boots. He adjusted the collar of his gray technician's jumpsuit, trying to cover the scar that ran from his jugular to his collarbone. But the fabric was stiff and cheap. He felt the phantom itch in his left shoulder, the deep ache where flesh met chrome and wire. His arm was synthetic from the elbow down, a relic of the border wars that he kept covered with a sin-skin glove. It was military-grade hardware, illegal for a civilian to possess without a permit. But Jace had become very good at forging permits. He was 34 years old but felt 50. His eyes were the color of wet pavement, watchful and tired. He watched the crowd surge around him. There were thousands of them, a river of species from 100 different worlds flowing into the customs gates of the crown. There were hulking dock workers with 4 arms, wealthy merchants floating on anti-grav discs, and tourists gawking at the holographic billboards that dominated the upper atmosphere of the ring. A massive projection flickered to life above the promenade, 300 feet tall. It was the royal family. The emperor looked stern and timeless, but Jace's eyes, like everyone else's, drifted to the figure on the right, Princess Lyra Visara. Even in a hologram, she was arrestingly alien. Her skin was a pale, luminous silver lilac, shimmering as if diamond dust had been mixed into her genetic code. Bioluminescent markings traced elegant geometric patterns down her cheekbones and throat, glowing with a soft, rhythmic pulse. From her temples rose 2 slender, curved horns that swept back like a natural crown, framing a face that was terrifyingly symmetrical. She looked perfect. She looked poised. She looked like she was 1,000,000 miles away from the people cheering for her image. Jace looked away, spitting on the grate at his feet. He did not care about princesses. He did not care about the Empire. He had spent 5 years in the mud and vacuum of the rim worlds fighting for them, and all he had gotten was a discharged medal and a cybernetic arm that seized up when it rained. He wanted a paycheck. He wanted a room with a door that locked. He wanted silence. He picked up his toolkit, a heavy canvas bag that clanked against his hip, and pushed his way toward the personnel lift. He had a job to do. The royal sector was separated from the common docks by 3 checkpoints and a blast shield. Jace made it through because his new credentials listed him as a Class 4 systems engineer, a role invisible enough to be ignored but essential enough to pass through security. He reported to the maintenance hub, a windowless room humming with the sound of cooling fans. His supervisor was a nervous, sweating man named Foreman Halloway, who looked like he had not slept in a week. Halloway tapped his datapad, not looking Jace in the eye. "You are the new transfer," Halloway said, his voice tight. "The vet." Jace nodded once. "Just a tech now." "Right. Well, we are short-handed. The Unity Festival has the whole grid overtaxed. I am putting you on the environmental systems for the lower palace levels." Halloway gestured vaguely at a schematic on the wall. "It is low-risk work, climate control nodes, humidity regulators, the secondary holoprojectors for the promenade. Keep the air breathable and the lights pretty. Do not go into the secure zones. Do not talk to the guards unless spoken to. And for the love of the void, if you see a noble, look at the floor." "I know the drill," Jace said, his voice raspy from disuse. Halloway finally looked at him, his gaze lingering on the gloved left hand. Good. We do not need heroes here. Jace, we need ghosts. People who fix things and disappear. Jace smirked, a humorless twitch of his lip. I am good at disappearing. He spent the next 6 hours crawling through maintenance tunnels that ran like arteries behind the marble and gold walls of the palace. It was soothing work. The machines did not lie. They did not have agendas. A power coupling was either connected or it was not. A filter was either clean or clogged. He was deep in a subjunction near the defense grid interface, replacing a burnt-out optical fuse when he saw it. He had his interface cable plugged into the wall port, linking his neural implant directly to the system diagnostics to speed up the calibration. Usually, the data stream from the palace was a smooth, white noise of efficiency. But today, there was a stutter. Jace frowned, pausing his work. He closed his eyes, focusing on the digital landscape projected into his mind. There it was again. A blip. A microsecond delay in the sensor sweep of the external shields. He isolated the packet. It looked like a glitch, a random error code generated by an old system. But Jace had been a forward scout in the war. He knew what a glitch looked like, and he knew what a ping looked like. Someone was testing the fence. The anomalies were perfectly spaced, every 45 seconds. A signal packet was sent to the perimeter defense grid, querying the response time of the shield generators. It was low frequency, designed to look like background radiation static, but the pattern was intelligent. It was a probe. Someone was looking for a blind spot. Jace pulled the jack from his neck, his heart rate spiking. He sat back on his heels in the cramped tunnel, wiping grease from his forehead. This was not his problem. He was a climate technician. If he reported this, he would be detained, questioned, and his background as a soldier would be dug up. They would ask why a veteran was poking around the defense grid. But the soldier in him, the part he thought he had buried on a muddy moon 5 years ago, refused to stay quiet. If the shields failed, the orbital ring was a sitting duck. Millions of people lived here. He packed his tools and crawled back to the hub. Holloway was eating a nutrient bar at his desk when Jace walked in. The foreman looked up, annoyed. "You are not done with the promenade sector," Holloway said. "I found something," Jace said, keeping his voice low. Holloway sighed, dropping the wrapper. "A clogged vent? Just bypass it." "No," Jace said. "I was syncing the environmental timers with the grid clock. I saw patterns in the defense logs, timing anomalies." Holloway went very still. "What kind of anomalies?" "External pings," Jace said, stepping closer to the desk. "Masked as static. Someone is mapping the shield refresh rate. Holloway, they are looking for a hole. It is not a bug. It is a prelude to a breach." Holloway stood up abruptly, his face flushing a blotchy red. He looked around the empty office, his eyes wide with a sudden, sharp fear that seemed disproportionate to the news. "You are overthinking things," Holloway snapped, his voice cracking. "You are a grunt." "Jace, you see enemies in the shadows because that is what you were trained to do. The grid is automated. It runs self-diagnostics 10 times a day. If there was a probe, the AI would catch it. The AI is ignoring it because the signal is tagged as maintenance traffic," Jace countered, his jaw tightening. "That means the call is coming from inside the house. Someone gave the probe a clearance code." "Stop," Holloway hissed. He walked around the desk and jabbed a finger at Jace's chest. "You listen to me. You do not look at the defense logs. You do not talk about the defense logs. You fix the air conditioning. If you file a report on this, security will drag you into a cell and strip that fancy arm off you to see if you are the hacker. Is that what you want?" Jace stared at the foreman. He saw the sweat beading on Holloway's upper lip. He saw the way the man's hand trembled. Holloway was not just dismissive. He was terrified. He knew, or at least, he suspected, and he was too afraid to look. Jace stepped back, the cold knot in his stomach tightening. "Fine. Good," Holloway said, letting out a breath that sounded like a deflating lung. "Just go finish the promenade projectors. The Unity speech is in 2 hours. The princess needs to look good." Jace turned and walked out, his grip on his tool bag white-knuckled. He did not like this. The air in the station suddenly felt thin, 500 floors above the maintenance hub. The air smelled of lilies and ozone. Princess Lyra Visara sat at the long obsidian table of the High Council, keeping her spine perfectly straight. She had been taught since she was a child that a princess never slouched, never fidgeted, and never showed boredom, even when her soul was slowly withering away. The council chamber was a cavernous room with walls of transparent aluminum, offering a view of the stars that made most people dizzy. Lyra barely noticed it. She was focused on the drone of Lord Malik's voice and regarding the betrothal stipulations. "Governor Theron has requested a modification to the dowry transfer schedule," Malik said, scrolling through a holographic document floating above the table. "He wishes for the orbital shipyard rights to be transferred prior to the ceremony, rather than after. To ensure security, of course." Lyra's father, the Emperor, sat at the head of the table. He was a mountain of a man, his skin the color of deep slate, his horns jagged and imposing. He nodded absently. "It seems reasonable. Kyle is a capable administrator. The shipyards will be safer under his direct control." Lyra's elder sister, Vespera, leaned forward. She was sharper than Lyra, harder, with eyes like flint. "It is a bold ask, Father. But Kale brings the southern systems into the fold. We should give him what he wants." Lyra sat in silence. They were discussing the sale of her life as if she were a plot of land or a cargo hauler. She kept her face impassive, a mask of porcelain cool. Bold ask, Lyra thought, her internal voice dripping with the sarcasm she could never speak aloud. He does not want the shipyards for security. He wants them so he can tax the trade routes and buy himself a new pleasure moon. "Input received," a soft, genderless voice chimed in her ear. Only Lyra could hear it. It was Arya, the subroutine AI implanted in her auditory cortex. "Shall I draft a counter-proposal highlighting Governor Theron's fiscal mismanagement in his current sector?" No, Lyra thought back. They would not listen. They would just say, "I am being difficult." Again. The Emperor turned his gaze to her. It was heavy, like physical weight. "Lyra, you have nothing to say? This concerns your future household." Lyra offered a thin, practiced smile. It concerned her household the way a butcher concerned a cow. "I trust your judgment, Father, and Lord Theron's. If he requires the shipyards to feel secure in our union, then who am I to deny him comfort?" The sarcasm was so faint, so razor-thin, that the Emperor missed it entirely. He nodded, satisfied. "Good. The Unity spectacle is commencing shortly. Go prepare your speech. Remember, Lyra, tone is everything. The outer sectors are restless. They need to see strength. They need to see devotion." "I am the very picture of devotion," Lyra said. She stood up, her ceremonial robes rustling like dry leaves. The heavy silk train dragged behind her as she walked out of the chamber. She nodded to the guards, kept her head high, and walked until the heavy doors hissed shut behind her. Then she let out a breath that was half growl, half sigh, heart rate elevated, Arya noted, cortisol levels rising, suggestion, rhythmic breathing, Suggestion: open an airlock and scream into the void, Lyra countered mentally. She walked down the pristine white corridor toward the lift. She felt the invisible chains pulling tight against her skin. She was 24 cycles old. She had an education in astrophysics, diplomacy, and xenolinguistics. She could fly a shuttle better than half the Royal Guard. And yet, her only purpose was to stand on a balcony, look beautiful, and marry a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. Cale Theron. She shivered. He was handsome, in a polished, predatory way. But there was something hollow about him. When he touched her arm, he did not hold her. He owned her. 1 hour until the broadcast. Arya reminded her. Makeup and wardrobe are waiting. Lyra rolled her eyes, checking the corridor to make sure she was alone. Even the walls had ears here. Fine. Let us go paint the doll. The Unity spectacle was a sensory assault. The promenade deck of the Visara crown had been transformed into a canyon of light. Holographic streamers rained down from the ceiling, dissolving before they hit the ground. Music, swelling and triumphant, pumped through the air, vibrating in the chests of the 50,000 citizens gathered below the royal balcony. Jace was not watching the show. He was jammed into a service alcove roughly 40 feet above the crowd, behind a velvet curtain that smelled of dust. He was recalibrating a failing power coupling for a gravity plate that made up part of the upper stage walkway. The supervisor, Holloway, had been right about one thing. The grid was overtaxed. The massive energy draw of the light show was causing micro-surges all over the sector. Jace had bypassed 3 safety protocols just to keep the stage lights from browning out. Below him, on the cantilevered platform that jutted out over the dizzying drop of the atrium, the princess was speaking. Jace paused his wrench, peering through a gap in the curtain. Lyra stood at the podium. She was radiant. Her dress was woven from light-refracting fiber that made her look like she was clothed in the nebula itself. Her voice was amplified, booming softly across the silence of the crowd. And so we bind ourselves not just by law, but by shared blood and shared hope, Lyra said. Her voice was melodious, perfect. We look to the stars not as conquerors, but as kin. The empire is not the stone of the palace, but the beat of your hearts. It was good. It was believable. Jace watched her face on the massive monitors. She looked earnest, but Jace was close enough to see the real woman, not the image. He saw the way her hand gripped the lectern so hard her knuckles were white. He saw the slight tremor in her jaw when she paused for applause. She is lying, Jace thought, surprised by the clarity of the observation. She does not believe a word of this. The speech ended. The crowd roared, a sound like a physical wave. Lyra bowed, waved, and then turned to walk off the main stage toward the private VIP corridor. She had to cross a narrow connecting bridge, a section of transparent floor panels suspended over the atrium drop. It was designed to look like she was walking on air. Jace frowned. He looked at the readout on his data pad. The surge he had been fighting in the lighting grid was migrating. It was jumping the circuit breakers. Sector 4. Gravity control. Jace's eyes widened. That was the bridge. Below. Lyra stepped onto the transparent panel. She was walking fast. Her shoulders slumped slightly now that she was out of the direct line of sight of the cameras. She reached up, pulling a jeweled pin from her hair as if she couldn't wait another second to get it off. The panel beneath her foot flickered. The soft blue hum of the anti-grav field stuttered into a harsh orange warning light. "Princess!" Jace shouted. It was instinct. He did not think about his rank. He did not think about the sniper drones that would vaporize him for approaching a royal. He dropped his wrench, kicked off the service ladder, and vaulted over the railing of the alcove. Lyra froze at the shout, turning her head. At that exact moment, the panel died. There was no sound of breaking glass, just the sudden absence of support. The floor vanished beneath her. Lyra gasped, her arms windmilling as she dropped. She did not fall far. Jace landed on the support strut adjacent to the bridge, the metal ringing under his boots. He lunged forward, his left arm shooting out. The servos in his cybernetic shoulder whined, a high-pitched mechanical scream as he caught her wrist. The jolt nearly dislocated his shoulder. He grunted, slamming his chest against the railing to anchor himself. Lyra swung in the open air, her feet dangling over a 500-foot drop to the plaza below. She looked up, her eyes wide, black pools of shock. Her skin was cool to the touch, but where his synthetic fingers gripped her arm, her bioluminescent markings flared blindingly bright, flashing a rapid, chaotic pattern of violet and white. "Got you," Jace gritted out, his teeth clenched. "Do not let go." "I had no intention of doing so." Lyra gasped, her voice trembling but surprisingly clear. Jace braced his legs, the metal of the catwalk digging into his thighs. He engaged the hydraulic overdrive in his arm. With a metallic groan, he hauled her up. She scrambled for purchase, her silk robes tangling, until she flopped over the railing and landed in a heap of shimmering fabric on the narrow maintenance catwalk beside him. For a second, there was silence, save for the distant roar of the crowd who had no idea their princess had almost just become a stain on the floor. Jace leaned back against the wall, breathing hard. He looked at her, up close. She was even more overwhelming. The scent of her was strange, spicy, electric, like a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. Her horns were intricate, carved with tiny symbols he had never seen on the hollows. Lyra pushed herself up to a sitting position. Her hair was a mess. She stared at him. She stared at the mechanical hand that was still resting near her shoulder, the metal fingers gleaming in the dim light. She looked at his face. She saw the sweat, the scar on his neck, the gray eyes that were wide with panic. "You," she said, breathless. "You are the technician." Jace realized he was touching a member of the Imperial family. He snatched his hand back as if he had been burned. "Your Highness, the panel. It shorted out." Lyra looked at the empty space where the floor had been. She looked back at him. Her markings were slowly dimming, fading from panic white to a soft, pulsing blue. "You moved very fast," she said softly. For a technician, before Jace could answer, the corridor exploded with noise. "Secure the area." A squad of royal guards burst through the blast doors at the end of the catwalk. They were armored in white plastoid, energy rifles raised. They saw Jace standing over the princess. "Get away from her," the lead guard roared. 3 laser sights locked onto Jace's chest. He raised his hands slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. They were going to shoot him. "Wait!" Lyra's voice cracked through the tension like a whip. She scrambled to her feet, placing herself physically between Jace and the guns. She held up a hand. "Palm out. Stand down," she commanded. Her voice had lost the tremble. It was pure steel now. "Your Highness, he attacked you," the guard captain shouted, advancing. "He saved me. You incompetent fool," Lyra snapped. She pointed at the missing floor panel. "The bridge failed. If he had not caught me, I would be dead." The captain froze. He looked at the gap in the floor, then at Jace, then back to the princess. He lowered his rifle an inch. Lyra smoothed her dress, regaining her composure in a blink. She turned to look at Jace. She studied him, really looked at him, with a gaze that felt like it was stripping away his skin. She saw the fear, yes, but she also saw the way he had positioned himself, weight balanced, ready to move, protecting her even with 3 guns pointed at him. "He is not an assassin," Lyra said, her tone dry and laced with a sudden, dark humor. "If he wanted me dead, he would have picked a less heroic method, and likely one that required less upper body strength." She looked at his arm. "What is your name?" she asked. Jace swallowed. Jace Coven. Well, Jace Coven," Lyra said. "It seems I am in your debt." The guard captain holstered his weapon, looking furious and embarrassed. "Your Highness, we need to move you to a secure location. We need to investigate this malfunction." "I agree," Lyra said. "And since your security grid clearly failed to detect a catastrophic structural failure, I am no longer confident in your maintenance protocols." She turned back to Jace. You spotted the failure?" Yes, Your Highness." Jace lied. It was easier than explaining. He just reacted. "Good." Lyra tilted her head, her horns catching the light. "Captain, transfer Technician Kovan to the Royal Wing immediately. I want him assigned as the technical liaison to my personal quarters." Jace's eyes widened. "Your Highness, I can't." "You can," Lyra interrupted, her voice brooking no argument. "If the very floor is trying to kill me, I want someone nearby who actually knows how to use a wrench, and someone who catches me when I fall." She stepped closer to him. For a second, just a second, the mask of the princess slipped completely. She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and desperate, lonely intensity. "Do not make me order you, Jace," she whispered, so low the guards could not hear. "Please." Jace looked at her. He felt the warning bells ringing in his head. This was dangerous. This was the center of the target. Being close to her meant being under the microscope. It meant Holloway's fear was now his reality. But he looked at her eyes, violet and deep and terrified beneath the command, and he felt that pull. The same pull that had made him jump over the rail. "I accept, Your Highness," Jace said roughly. "Excellent." Lyra stepped back, the mask sliding back into place. "Wash up, Coven. You have grease on your face." She turned and swept down the corridor, the guards falling in around her like a white wall. Jace stood alone on the catwalk, the adrenaline crashing out of his system, leaving him shaking. He looked down at his cybernetic hand. He could still feel the phantom warmth of her skin against the cold metal. He was in trouble. He was in so much trouble. High above the atrium, in a room that did not exist on any official blueprint, a figure sat before a bank of encrypted monitors. The room was dark, lit only by the wash of data streams. On the central screen, the footage of the accident played on a loop, the floor failing, the princess falling, the mechanic leaping. The figure watched the rescue. They watched the way Jace moved, the combat-ready stance, the speed of the cybernetic engagement. A gloved hand reached out and paused the video on a close-up of Jace's face. A voice, distorted by a heavy scrambler, filled the small room. It sounded like grinding stones. "The human is inconvenient." The screen flickered, and the file was deleted. The royal wing of the Visara crown was less a living space and more a museum where the exhibits were expected to breathe. It was a sprawling, silent sector of polished obsidian floors and vaulted ceilings that mimicked the twilight sky of the homeworld. The air was scrubbed so clean it tasted sterile, recycled through filters that cost more than Jace's entire pension. For the last 5 days, Jace had learned the geography of this gilded cage intimately. He knew that the gravity plating in the west corridor hummed at a frequency that gave him a headache if he stood there too long. He knew that the bioluminescent vines draping the balconies were not just decoration but part of the oxygen scrubbing system. and they wilted if someone raised their voice too loud nearby. He was a ghost in a gray jumpsuit, moving through the high-ceilinged halls with a tool bag slung over his organic shoulder. His job was trivial. It was insulting, really, for a man who used to calibrate targeting arrays for orbital bombardment cannons. Now, he fixed flickering starlight generators and tuned the acoustic dampeners in the library. He was kneeling beneath a floating sculpture in the main atrium, adjusting the magnetic repulsion field that kept the heavy stone suspended, when a shadow fell over him. "You are very quiet for a human," a voice said. Jace didn't jump. He finished the turn on the magnetic bolt, locked the casing, and stood up slowly. Princess Lyra was hovering, literally hovering, drifting 3 inches off the floor on a pair of anti-grav sandals that looked like ribbons of light wrapped around her feet. She was wearing casual robes today, a flowing ensemble of deep indigo that made her silver lilac skin look like moonlight on water. The bioluminescent markings on her face were dim, pulsing with a slow, bored rhythm. "I am working, Your Highness," Jace said, keeping his eyes on the sculpture. "Machinery prefers silence." Lyra drifted closer, circling him like a curious shark. "You have been here 5 days. Jace Coven, you have fixed the ceiling stars, the water scrubbers, and the sonic shower in the guest quarters. And you have said approximately 40 words to me. Is that a human custom? To be a stone with legs?" "It is a survival custom," Jace said dryly. "The nail that sticks up gets hammered down, or in this palace, erased." Lyra laughed. It was a bright, sharp sound that echoed in the empty hall. She landed, her sandals clicking softly as the gravity took hold. "You are funny. You try very hard not to be, which makes it funnier." She walked around him, inspecting his tool belt. "Why do you wear that? We have drones that can carry equipment. Drones can be hacked," Jace said, "and they are slow. If I need a hydro spanner, I want it at my hip, not floating 10 feet away buffering a command signal." Lyra wrinkled her nose, gesturing at his gray jumpsuit. "And the outfit? Is gray the only color in your spectrum? You look like a piece of unpainted bulkhead." "It is functional," Jace said, checking the readout on the sculpture's base. "It is fire retardant, insulated, and has 16 pockets. I do not need to sparkle. Your Highness, that is your department." He regretted the words the moment they left his mouth. It was too sharp, too familiar. He braced himself for a reprimand, for the Imperial mask to slam down. Instead, Lyra grinned. Her markings flared a brighter violet. "I suppose it is," she said. "I sparkle so the Council has something to look at while they ignore everything I say." She leaned against a pillar, watching him pack his tools. "Tell me, Jace, what did you do before you were fixing my furniture? You move like a soldier. You scan every room before you enter it." "I was a heavy systems engineer," Jace lied smoothly. "Industrial sector, hazardous environments. You learn to watch your step when a misstep means falling into a plasma vent." Lyra studied him, her head tilted. Her horns caught the ambient light, shimmering like pearl. "You are a terrible liar, but I will let it slide today. You are entertaining enough as a mystery." She pushed off the pillar. "Fix the wardrobe drones in my dressing chamber next. One of them keeps trying to put me in a formal cape for breakfast. It is aggressive." Jace slung his bag over his shoulder. "I will take a look, though perhaps the drone just has a sense of dramatic flair." Lyra smirked over her shoulder as she walked away. "Or perhaps it is just a high-maintenance collection of firmware bugs in a pretty casing." Jace froze. He had muttered that exact phrase about her yesterday, under his breath, while fixing a ventilation unit 3 rooms away. He hadn't thought she was even in the wing. He watched her disappear around the corner. She had heard him, and she hadn't executed him. She had laughed. He shook his head, the metal of his cybernetic arm clicking softly. Dangerous. She was dangerous in a way no weapon ever was. As the days bled into a week, the banter became a routine. Lyra would find him bored out of her mind while her fiancé, Lord Kale, was off negotiating trade deals, or so the official schedule said. She would float around Jace, asking odd questions about Earth, about human food, about why he frowned when he thought no one was looking. Jace deflected, dodged, and kept his answers short. But beneath the surface, he was doing something else. He was hunting. Every time he opened a panel to fix a fan, he checked the data lines. Every time he recalibrated a sensor, he ran a tracer on the feed. The palace was leaking. He found the anomalies late one night while repairing a blind spot in the corridor sensors near Lyra's bedroom. The official log said the camera had burned out due to a power surge. But when Jace pulled the unit, the hardware was pristine. The camera hadn't burned out. It had been commanded to shut down. He checked the timestamps. Every night between 2 and 3 in the morning, the sensors in the East Wing, Lyra's private corridor, went dark for 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds. Long enough for a data packet to burst out, or for a very fast shadow to slip in. He sat on the floor of the corridor, the open panel spilling wires like guts. This wasn't just a glitch, this was a road map. Someone was carving a digital tunnel straight to the princess. He couldn't report it. Halloway would panic. The royal guard was likely compromised. Who else had the codes to silence the sensors? So Jace did the only thing he could. He patched it. He rewrote the code, burying a ghost protocol in the system that would reroute the shutdown command into a null loop. The next time someone tried to blind the sensors, the cameras would stay on, but the system would report they were off. He sealed the panel, his heart rate steady but heavy. He was playing a game of chess against an invisible opponent, and he was just a pawn with a screwdriver. The incident happened 2 days later. It was evening, the time when the Visara crown simulated a soft, amber twilight. Jace had a work order for the primary wardrobe AI in the princess's dressing chambers. The ticket said the quantum node was desynchronizing, causing the holographic mirrors to lag. The schedule indicated Lyra was at a state dinner with Lord Kale and the High Council. The suite should have been empty. Jace entered the outer access antechamber, a small utility room separated from the main dressing room by a thick wall. He didn't need to go inside the room itself. He just needed access to the main data trunk that fed the amenities. He keyed the console, his fingers flying over the haptic interface. System diagnostic, Jace muttered. Isolate the quantum node. Display feed on local holo. He wanted to see the code structure. He wanted to see the waterfall of numbers that would tell him where the lag was. He hit enter. The system, corrupted by the same rot that infested the rest of the palace, misinterpreted the command. Instead of displaying the code on his small handheld screen, it triggered the main holographic projector in the utility room. And instead of data, it grabbed the live visual feed from the camera inside the dressing room. The air in the utility room shimmered and coalesced into a life-size, high-definition projection. Jace looked up and stopped breathing. He was not looking at code. He was looking at Lyra. She was standing in the center of her dressing room, 10 feet away in virtual space, but looking solid enough to touch. The state dinner must have ended early, or she had fled. She was facing away from him. She was in the process of removing the ceremonial armor gown she wore for high-risk political events. The heavy jeweled carapace had already been unclasped. It slid down her body with a hiss of silk, pooling on the floor. She was not naked. but she was bare in a way that felt more intimate than nudity. She wore only a thin, translucent underlayer that clung to her silver skin like a second epidermis. Jace saw the line of her spine, a ridge of delicate, elegant vertebrae. He saw the bioluminescent markings on her back, usually hidden, glowing with a soft, weary blue light. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her head bowed as if the weight of her horns was suddenly too much to bear. She looked small, stripped of the jewels, the robes, and the posture of royalty. She looked terrifyingly lonely. Jace stood frozen. His brain screamed at him to cut the feed. Turn it off now. But his hand wouldn't move. He was paralyzed by a collision of emotions that hit him like a shockwave. Horror. He was violating her privacy in the worst possible way. Fear. If anyone walked in, he was a dead man. And beneath that, a sudden crushing wave of desire that made his mouth go dry. She was beautiful, not the billboard beauty of the propaganda posters, but a raw, breathing beauty that hurt to look at. In the projection. Lyra stiffened. The privacy field in her room, the system Jace was supposed to be fixing, flickered. The change in air pressure, the faint hum of the active camera, alerted her. She turned her head, looking over her shoulder. Her eyes narrowed. She scanned the room, not seeing anyone, but sensing the gaze. She looked at the wall where the hidden camera lens was. She knew. The projection vanished as Jace slammed his cybernetic hand onto the console, shattering the interface glass. The room plunged back into darkness. "Oh no," Jace whispered. The silence in the utility room was loud enough to burst his eardrums. "Oh no." He scrambled backward, his boots slipping on the floor. He needed to leave. He needed to run. The door to the utility room hissed open. Lyra stood there. She had not grabbed a robe. She was barefoot, the translucent underlayer shimmering against her skin. Her chest was heaving, her markings flaring a chaotic, angry crimson. Her eyes were wide, blazing with a mixture of humiliation and fury. She tracked the cable from the wall to the broken console, and then to Jace. "You," she breathed. The word was a weapon. Jace scrambled to his feet, backing up until he hit the far wall. He held his hands up, palms open. His face felt like it was on fire. "Your Highness, I swear I didn't..." It was a glitch. Lyra stepped into the room. The door slid shut behind her, sealing them in the small, dim space. She advanced on him, and for the first time, Jace was genuinely terrified of her. Not because of her rank, but because of the raw, exposed emotion radiating off her. "You were watching," she said, her voice shaking. "How long? How long have you been watching?" "Seconds," Jace stammered. His voice cracked. "I was running a diagnostic on the node. The feed misrouted. It projected you. I tried to shut it down. I smashed the console. Look!" He pointed at the sparking debris of the interface. Lyra didn't look. She kept her eyes locked on his. She was close now, close enough that he could smell the scent of her, ozone and that faint, sweet, metallic tang of her skin. "You saw me," she whispered. "I am sorry," Jace said. The words felt inadequate, tiny. "I am so sorry. I will request a transfer. I will leave the palace tonight. You will never see me again." He tried to sidestep her, to get to the door. He couldn't be here. The air in the room was too thick, too charged. He felt like he was standing inside a reactor core. "I will go," Jace said, his voice dropping to a rasp. "I will disappear." He moved to pass her. Lyra's hand shot out. She caught his arm, his flesh arm, not the metal one. Her fingers dug into his bicep, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't leave." The command was soft, barely a breath, but it stopped him dead. Jace looked down at her. Her anger was crumbling, the crimson in her markings fading back to a swirling, confused violet. She wasn't looking at him like a princess looking at a servant. She was looking at him like a drowning woman looking at a raft. "What?" Jace whispered. "Don't leave," Lyra repeated. Her voice trembled, hovering on the edge of a confession. "Everyone leaves. Or they take what they want and they go. Or they look at me and see a treaty, or a statue, or a broodmare." She stepped closer. The space between them vanished. Jace could feel the heat radiating from her body. He could see the pulse fluttering frantically in the hollow of her throat. "You saw me," Lyra said, her eyes searching his face. "When the feed turned on, you did not look away immediately. Why?" Jace swallowed hard. He should lie. He should say he was frozen with fear. "Because I couldn't," he admitted, the truth tearing its way out of his throat. Lyra's breath hitched. "Why?" "Because you were alone," Jace said. "Because for a second, you weren't the princess. You were just real. And you looked so sad that I wanted to put my fist through the wall." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Lyra's fingers relaxed on his arm, but she didn't let go. Her hand slid down his forearm to his wrist, her thumb tracing the pulse point where his heart was hammering against his skin. "Real," she echoed. She looked up at him. The political mask was gone. The humor was gone. There was only a profound, aching hunger, not just for touch, but for the visibility he had just described. Jace's hand, his cybernetic one, twitched at his side. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to touch the line of her jaw, to trace the bioluminescence that was pulsing in time with her heartbeat. It was a treasonous thought. It was a thought that could get him executed. And yet, he didn't pull away. Lyra leaned in. She was so close now that the tips of her horns almost brushed his forehead. Her gaze dropped to his mouth, then back up to his eyes. "You are not scared of me," she whispered. "I am terrified of you," Jace murmured. "Good," she said. She tilted her head. The movement was slow, deliberate. She was giving him time to run. She was giving him time to push her away. Jace didn't run. He leaned in, a fraction of an inch, surrendering to the gravity that had been pulling at them since he caught her on the bridge. The air crackled. The scent of ozone flared. His hand came up, hovering inches from her waist. Her lips parted. Chime. The sound was sharp, high-pitched, and artificial. It cut through the room like a physical blade. Incoming priority transmission. Lord Theron. The automated voice of the palace AI boomed from the overhead speakers. Lyra flinched as if she had been struck. She gasped, stumbling back 2 steps. The connection broke. The heat vanished, replaced by the cold rush of reality. She stood there, chest heaving, staring at Jace with wide, shocked eyes. She looked down at her own hand, the one that had been holding his wrist, as if she didn't recognize it. Jace stood paralyzed, his hand still half raised, looking at the space where she had just been. Lyra straightened her spine. It was a visible physical effort. She pulled the fragments of her composure around her like a shield. She lifted her chin, her eyes hardening, though the flush on her cheeks remained. "Technician Coven," she said. Her voice was brittle. "Your Highness," Jace answered, snapping to attention. He felt sick. "File a report on the node failure," Lyra said. "Encrypt it. Authorization code Omega-3. For my eyes only. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Highness. It was a malfunction," she stated, her voice trembling slightly on the last word. "Nothing more. Nothing more," Jace lied. Lyra looked at him one last time. There was a flicker of regret in her eyes, a ghost of the vulnerability he had seen on the projection. Then she turned and swept out of the utility room, the door hissing shut behind her. Jace was left alone in the dark, listening to the hum of the cooling fans and the frantic beating of his own heart. That night, sleep was a foreign concept. Jace lay on the narrow cot in his quarters in the technician's block. The room was a gray box, unadorned except for a small pile of paper books, antiques he collected, and his weapon, disassembled on the desk. He stared at the ceiling. He replayed the moment in the utility room over and over, the way she had looked at him, the way her skin felt, the way she had said, "Don't leave." He rolled over, burying his face in the pillow. He was an idiot. He was a fool. He was a moth flying straight into a fusion drive. She was the princess of the Visara Empire. He was a mechanic with a stolen arm and a criminal record. There was no version of this story where they ended up together. There were only versions where he ended up dead, or she ended up ruined. I have to leave, he thought. I have to put in the transfer request tomorrow. But even as he thought it, he knew he wouldn't. He remembered the look in her eyes, the loneliness that matched his own. He couldn't leave her alone in that tank of sharks. Not now. 500 floors up. Lyra lay in a bed large enough for 6 people. The sheets were silk, the pillows stuffed with cloud down. She was staring at the canopy, her hand resting on her stomach. She could still feel the phantom pressure of his presence. She had almost kissed him. She, the imperial heir, had almost kissed a human grease monkey in a utility closet. It was madness. It was political suicide, and it was the most alive she had felt in years. She turned on her side, pulling her knees to her chest. She thought about Cale, his cold hands, his calculated smiles, the way he looked at her like she was a prize to be shelved. Then she thought about Jace, the rough rasp of his voice, the grease on his jumpsuit, the way he had looked at her with pure, terrified awe. He hadn't looked at the princess. He had looked at Lyra. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. Deep in the security sub-basement, 3 levels below where Jace slept, a terminal hummed to life. A figure sat in the gloom, illuminated only by the blue wash of the screen. They were reviewing the internal surveillance logs for the Royal Wing. The screen showed the timestamp, 1942. Location, Utility Node 4 Alpha. Event, system malfunction, unauthorized projection. The figure watched the data stream. They saw the duration of the event. They saw the door open. They saw the audio spikes that indicated conversation, though the specific words were garbled by the interference Jace had caused when he smashed the console. But the biometric readings were clear. Heart rates elevated, pheromone markers spiking, proximity sensors showing 2 bodies standing less than 3 inches apart for 45 seconds. The figure tapped a command. Delete log, confirm. The data vanished. The record of the moment was wiped clean from the official servers. The figure leaned back, the chair creaking. A distorted mechanical chuckle filled the room. The trap is set, the voice whispered. Let them get closer. It will make the fall so much sweeter. The air in the Royal Wing had changed. Before, it had been a vacuum of polite silence and sterile luxury. Now, it felt like the inside of a fusion drive seconds before ignition. For 3 days, Jace and Lyra existed in a state of high tensile wire tension. They maintained the facade of technician and royal patron, but the performance was fraying at the edges. When Jace handed her a data pad with the repair schedule, his fingers brushed hers, and the contact sent a jolt through him that was sharper than a static discharge. When Lyra passed him in the corridor, flanked by her handmaidens, her eyes would slide to his, holding his gaze for a fraction of a second too long, dark and heavy with a secret that terrified them both. They did not speak of the dressing room. They did not speak of the almost kiss. They buried it under layers of protocol. But the ghost of that moment stood between them, breathing down their necks. Then Lord Cale Theron arrived, and the air got thin enough to choke on. Cale was everything Jace was not. He was tall, with skin the color of polished slate and horns that curled with perfect, aristocratic symmetry. He wore tunics of crushed velvet and silk, and he moved with the liquid grace of a predator who had never known hunger. He was charming, he was handsome, and his eyes were as dead as a shark's. Jace watched from the shadows of a maintenance alcove as Cale greeted Lyra in the main atrium. The Lord took her hand, bowing low, pressing his lips to her knuckles. It looked romantic to the casual observer. To Jace, it looked like an appraisal. Cale was not holding a hand. He was checking the quality of his purchase. "You look radiant, my dear," Cale said, his voice smooth and rich, like expensive chocolate. "The galaxy has been waiting for this union." "I have been waiting," Lyra smiled. It was a perfect porcelain smile that did not reach her eyes. "You are kind, my lord. The council is eager for the alliance to be formalized." "Not just the council," Kyle purred. He stepped closer, placing a hand on her waist, his fingers splayed out, claiming territory. "I intend to make you very happy. Lyra, we will rewrite the history of this empire together." Jace gripped the handle of his hydro spanner until his knuckles turned white. He saw the slight stiffness in Lyra's spine, the way she leaned away, just a millimeter from Cale's touch. Later that afternoon, Jace found himself fixing a perfectly functional hollow emitter in the hallway just to be near the door of the parlor where they were having tea. He told himself it was security. He told himself he was monitoring the sensors. He was lying. Lyra came out 20 minutes later, alone. She stopped when she saw him. Her mask slipped, just for a heartbeat, revealing a profound exhaustion. "He asks about the dowry before he asks about my day," Lyra murmured, staring at a tapestry on the wall. "He touches me like I am a new flagship he is about to christen." Jace checked the corridor. It was empty. "He is a politician," Jace said, keeping his voice flat. "He sees value." Lyra turned to him. Her violet eyes were burning. "And what do you see, Jace?" Jace looked at her. He wanted to tell her he saw a woman who was drowning in plain sight. He wanted to tell her that Cale wasn't fit to polish her boots. "I see a system that is overheating," Jace said softly. "You need to vent the pressure, Your Highness, before you explode." Lyra laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Tonight is the gala. 5,000 dignitaries, the entire diplomatic corps. If I explode, I will take half the sector leadership with me." She stepped closer, dropping her voice. "Be there. Please. I am assigned to perimeter security," Jace said. "Closer," Lyra commanded. "Not on the perimeter. Be inside. I need to know there is one person in the room who is not trying to sell me or buy me." Jace looked at Cale's heavy crest on the banner behind her. "I will be on the technician's balcony, overlooking the stage." "Good," Lyra whispered. She swept away as the sound of footsteps approached, leaving Jace standing in the cold hall with the scent of her perfume lingering in his nose. The diplomatic gala was an exercise in excess. The great hall of the Visara Crown was a cavernous space capable of docking a frigate, but tonight it was filled with light, music, and the most powerful beings in the quadrant. The floor was a sea of shifting colors. Anti-grav waiters floated above the crowd with trays of crystalline wine. The ceiling had been programmed to display a live feed of the nebula outside, but enhanced, so the colors swirled in psychedelic ribbons of gold and violet. Jay stood on the tertiary maintenance balcony 60 feet above the floor. He was wearing his dress uniform, which was just his gray jumpsuit with a black jacket over it, and he had a direct link to the security grid in his ear. From up here, the people looked like ants. Very expensive, shiny ants. He scanned the crowd. He marked the exits. He tagged the security detail. There were too many guards, and yet, not enough. The grid was still showing those microscopic hiccups he had found days ago. Tiny spikes in the power flow. Phantom data packets. It made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He found Lyra immediately. She was the brightest star in the room. She was wearing a gown of woven platinum mesh that flowed around her like liquid metal. Her horns were draped in chains of light diamonds. She was dancing with Kale in the center of the floor. They moved in perfect synchronization. Kale whispered something in her ear, and Lyra laughed. It looked genuine. The crowd sighed in collective adoration. Jace zoomed in with his ocular implant. He saw the tension in Lyra's jaw. He saw the way her eyes darted around the room, scanning, searching. She looked up, across 60 feet of vertical space, through the haze of holographic confetti and the glare of the spotlights. Her gaze locked onto the dark shadow of the balcony. She stopped dancing for a fraction of a second. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just looked at him. It was a look of profound, terrifying intimacy. It was an anchor dropped in a storm. "I see you," the look said. "I am here because you are there." Jace felt the breath leave his lungs. He raised his hand, touching 2 fingers to his forehead in a salute that was not regulation. Kale spun her around, breaking the line of sight. Jace exhaled, looking down at his datapad. His heart rate was redlining. This was unsustainable. He was a soldier, not a romantic lead in a tragedy. He needed to focus on the job. He cycled through the defense grid diagnostics. Green, 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 amber. Jace frowned. Sector 7, the main power trunk for the gravity stabilizers in the ballroom. The readout flickered. It wasn't a failure. It was a bypass. Someone had just rerouted the safety protocols for the local gravity field. Jace tapped his comms bead. "Control, this is Rover 2. I am reading a fluctuation in the ballroom grav plate assembly. Permission to cycle the breakers." "Negative, Rover 2. The control voice crackled back, sounding bored. "We are mid-ceremony. Do not touch the lights. It is probably just the bass from the orchestra." "It is not the orchestra," Jace snapped. "It is a sequence. Someone is—" The lights went out, not all of them, just the main overhead floods. The room plunged into a disorienting twilight, lit only by the swirling nebula projection on the ceiling. Then the gravity lurched. It didn't fail completely, and it stuttered. For 1 second, everyone in the ballroom felt weightless, lifting 3 inches off the floor, stomach is dropping. Then the gravity slammed back on at double strength, knocking people to their knees. Screams erupted. Trays crashed. The music died in a squeal of feedback. Jace didn't wait for permission. He vaulted over the railing of the balcony, grabbing a decorative banner as he fell. He slid down the silk fabric, burning his palms, and dropped onto the elevated VIP dais 10 feet above the dance floor. He scanned the chaos. His combat implants flooded his vision with target identifiers. Civilians, panicked, guards, confused, threat, active. He saw him. A caterer, a generic-looking humanoid with a tray of drinks, had not fallen. He had braced himself against a pillar the moment the gravity stuttered. Now. While everyone else was scrambling to stand up under the heavy G-force, the caterer was moving. He reached under his serving tunic and pulled out a compact energy pistol. It wasn't a military weapon. It was an assassin's tool, silent, high yield, easily concealed. He wasn't aiming at the crowd. He was aiming at the center of the dance floor. Lyra was on her knees, her heavy gown pinning her down in the increased gravity. Cale was beside her, struggling to rise. Jace didn't think. He moved. He sprinted across the dais, his cybernetic legs powering through the heavy gravity that was pinning everyone else. He launched himself off the edge of the stage, a human missile aimed at the space between the gun and the princess. "Princess! Down!" Jace roared. Lyra looked up. She saw the caterer. She saw the gun. She saw Jace flying through the air. The assassin fired. A bolt of cohesive plasma, blue-white and blinding, shrieked across the room. It was meant for Lyra's heart. It hit Jace's left shoulder. The impact spun him around in midair. He slammed into Lyra, tackling her to the floor, covering her body with his own. The smell of ozone and burning synthetic flesh filled the air instantly. Jace grunted, a guttural sound of shock and pain, as his cybernetic shoulder absorbed the energy. The metal plating slagged, fusing the servos, and the heat seared the organic flesh where the graft met his chest. "Jace!" Lyra screamed, her voice cutting through the ringing in his ears. "Stay down!" Jace rasped, his teeth clenched against the agony. The gravity normalized with a sickening lurch. "Secure the doors!" someone shouted. Jace rolled off Lyra, pulling his own weapon, a heavy service pistol he had concealed in his jacket. He scanned for the shooter. The caterer was gone. He had vanished into the panicking crowd, slipping away in the confusion. Lyra scrambled up, grabbing Jace's good arm. Her face was pale, her markings flashing a frantic, staccato white. "You are hit. You are burning. I am fine." Jace lied, trying to stand. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, sparking. Guards swarmed them. A ring of white armor closed in. Cale was suddenly there. He looked ruffled, but unhurt. He pushed through the guards, looking down at Lyra. "Lyra, are you injured?" Lyra ignored him. She was staring at Jace's shoulder, her hands hovering over the blackened metal. "We need a medic. Get her to the safe room." Cale ordered the guards, his voice sharp. "Get her out of here." The assassin could still be active. Jace looked at Cale. He saw it. It was subtle. A micro-expression that lasted less than a second. Cale didn't look at the crowd to find the shooter. He didn't look at the security feeds. He looked at the service exit behind the heavy velvet curtains on the east wall. It was a look of confirmation, a look of someone checking an egress route that had been prearranged. Cale wasn't surprised by the attack. He was annoyed that it had missed. He knows, Jace thought, the realization hitting him harder than the plasma bolt. He is not the target. He is the architect. "Come, Lyra," Cale said, reaching for her arm. His grip was too tight. "We must go. Now." Lyra looked at Cale's hand, then at Jace, who was swaying slightly, blood soaking the collar of his jacket. "No," Lyra said. Cale blinked. "Excuse me?" "I am not going anywhere without him," Lyra said, pointing at Jace. "He is just a technician," Cale snapped, his mask slipping. "He is wounded baggage. The Royal Guard will protect you." "The Royal Guard let a man with a plasma pistol within 10 feet of me," Lyra yelled. Her voice echoed in the suddenly quiet hall. The only person who saw the threat was him. She turned to the captain of the guard. "You take orders from him." "Your Highness?" the captain stammered. "He is a civilian. He is the only one who knows the grid is compromised," Lyra said. "Do as he says, or I will have you stripped of your rank before the sun rises." The captain looked at Cale, then at the furious princess. He turned to Jace. "What are your orders?" Jace swallowed the pain, forcing his mind to clear. "The east exit is a trap. If they came in through the service crew, they have the perimeter corridors mined. We can't use the main lifts." He looked at Cale. The Lord's eyes were cold, calculating. "We go down," Jace said, "into the substructure, the maintenance tunnels. They won't have the schematics for the old service shafts." "That is absurd," Kale scoffed. "Dragging the princess through the sewers. It is the only way out of the kill box," Jace said. "Move," Lyra ordered. She grabbed Jace's good hand, intertwining her fingers with his. The gesture was possessive, desperate. Jace led them, a small detail of 4 guards. Lyra and a seething Kale ran through the kitchen, ignoring the screaming staff, and burst into the service corridors. The tunnels were a maze of pipes and steam. They were 3 levels down when the ambush hit. The lights in the corridor died. Red emergency strobes flared to life. Bulkhead doors at both ends of the hallway slammed shut, locking them in a 50-foot stretch of Durasteel. Vents opened in the ceiling. Gas hissed out. "They are flushing us," the captain shouted, banging on the door. "Nerve agent!" Jace looked at the panel on the wall. It was dead. Hard locked from the outside. Kale had pulled a handkerchief and was covering his mouth, looking at the vents with a strange lack of panic. "Jace." Lyra coughed, looking at him. Her eyes were watering. Jace scanned the corridor. He saw the manual override lever for the gravity plating. "Hold on to something," Jace yelled. He didn't wait. He raised his pistol and fired at the control box. He didn't try to hack it. He blew it off the wall. The gravity failed instantly. The sudden shift to 0G disoriented everyone. The guards flailed, floating upward. Kyle hit the ceiling with a grunt, but Jace was ready. He grabbed a pipe with his legs, anchoring himself. He grabbed Lyra by the waist, pulling her close. The gas, dependent on air circulation fans that had just lost power due to the destroyed console, stopped venting. The heavy molecules of the nerve agent drifted harmlessly in globs, unable to disperse effectively without the fans. Jace kicked off the wall, dragging Lyra through the air like a swimmer. "The hatch!" Jace pointed to a maintenance hatch in the floor, now the ceiling. He reached it, unlatching the wheel with his good hand. "It's stuck. Help me," he gritted out. Lyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed the wheel, her strength surprising for someone so slight. Together, they wrenched it open. They pulled themselves through into the vertical shaft just as the blast doors below blew open and black-clad mercenaries stormed the hallway they had just left. Jace slammed the hatch shut and welded it with 2 shots from his pistol. "Safe," Jace breathed, floating in the dark shaft. For a minute, the maintenance shaft was narrow, dark, and completely silent. They were alone. The guards and Kale had been separated from them when Jace blew the hatch. They floated in the zero gravity, drifting against each other. There was no up or down. There was only the heat of their bodies in the cold dark. Lyra was pressed against him, her legs tangled with his to keep them from drifting apart. Her hands were clutching the lapels of his ruined jacket. Her face was inches from his. Jace could feel her heart beating, a rapid, fluttery rhythm against his chest. He could smell the sweat and the fear, but also the ozone scent of her arousal and adrenaline. Her bioluminescence was going haywire. In the pitch black, her markings were the only light source, glowing a fierce, pulsing indigo that illuminated her wide eyes and the curve of her mouth. "You are bleeding," Lyra whispered, her hand hovering over his shoulder. "It is mostly hydraulic fluid," Jace said, his voice rough. "And some skin. I will live." Lyra looked at him. She looked at the scar on his neck, the grim set of his jaw, the way he watched the darkness over her shoulder. "You saved me," she said, again. "It is the job," Jace said. "No," Lyra said firmly. She reached up, placing a hand on his cheek. Her skin was cool, startling against his feverish heat. "That was not the job. You took a plasma bolt for me. That is not in the technician handbook. Jace looked at her. He couldn't look away. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, intoxicating clarity. He was floating in the dark with a princess. They were hunted. They were trapped. And he had never wanted anything as much as he wanted to kiss her right now. I could not let them hurt you, Jace admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. The thought of it stopped my heart. Lyra's breath hitched. She pulled him closer until their foreheads were touching. I have never been so terrified, she whispered. And I have never felt safer than I do right now. Floating in a sewer with you. Jace closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. We need to move. They will be cutting through the hatch. I know. Lyra breathed. Just 1 second. They drifted there for a long heartbeat, suspended in the void, 2 glowing embers in the dark. It was a moment of absolute peace in the center of a war. Then Jace opened his eyes. We need to get to the secure node, level 9. If my theory is right, that is where the attack was coordinated. They moved like ghosts through the guts of the station. Jace led them through crawl spaces and cable runs, avoiding the patrols that were now sweeping the corridors. They reached the secondary security hub an hour later. It was a small, unmanned server room used for backup data storage. Jace jacked his interface cable into the port, his bad arm hanging limp. He worked with one hand, his fingers flying over the holographic keys. He bypassed the firewalls. He sliced through the encryption. Got it, Jace said. He pulled up the internal comms logs from the last 6 hours. Lyra stood behind him, watching the screen. The voice was distorted, but the ID tag was clear. User, Lord Kael Theron. Recipient, Chief of Palace Security. Jace played the file. Make it look messy. Kael's voice said, I want panic. I want the council terrified. If the princess is injured, fine. Casualties sell the narrative. But ensure the target is the stability of the ring. We need a justification for martial law. Understood, my lord, the security chief replied. And the princess? If she survives, we marry her and I rule as regent, Kael said. If she dies, she becomes a martyr, and I rule as avenger. Either way, the crown falls to me. Lyra made a sound like she had been punched. She stepped back, her hand covering her mouth. He planned it, she whispered. He planned to shoot me, or marry me. It did not matter, Jace kept typing. He pulled up another file. It was a schematic, a plan to dismantle the Senate and replace the regional governors with military overseers. And at the top of the pyramid, a puppet empress, Lyra, striped of power, used only as a face to legitimize a tyranny. I was the cage, Lyra said, her voice trembling with rage. They were going to use my face to enslave my people. I am just the galaxy's most expensive ornament. She laughed, a bitter, jagged sound, a hood ornament on a war machine. Jace stopped typing. He turned to her. He took her hand, the one with the royal signet ring, and held it. You are not an ornament, Jace said fiercely. You are the one who stood up in the ballroom. You are the one who pulled a manual override wheel when the gravity failed. You are not what they say you are. Lyra looked at him, tears shimmering in her violet eyes. And what are you? Jace? She asked. A technician? A soldier? A hero? I was a weapon, Jace said. The confession tumbled out. In the border wars, I commanded a stealth unit. We did things, terrible things. For the Empire, they gave me medals. They called me a tactical genius. Then the peace treaty was signed, and they discharged me. I was inconvenient, a weapon with no war. He looked down at his broken cybernetic arm. I hated it. I hated being a tool in someone else's hand. I swore I would never pick up a gun for them again. He looked up at her. But I will pick one up for you. Lyra stared at him. The grief in her eyes shifted, hardening into resolve. She took his wounded hand, the metal one, and pressed it against her chest. He could feel the rapid double beat of her hearts beneath the silken skin. Not for me, she said. With me. She leaned in, her gaze intense. I do not want a guard. Jace, I have guards. They follow orders. I want you, because you make choices. She pressed his hand harder against her heart. Choose me, not out of duty. Not because I am a princess. Choose this. Choose us. Jace felt the warmth of her skin seeping into his cold metal fingers. He felt the walls of his cynical, guarded life crumbling down. I choose you, Jace whispered. Lyra nodded. Then we cannot stay. If we go back upstairs, Kale will kill us. If we stay here, they will find us. We have the data, Jace said, looking at the drive. We have the proof of treason, but we cannot broadcast it from here. Lyra said, they have locked down the grid. We need to get it off station. We need to get to a relay that Kale doesn't control. Jace looked at the schematic of the hangar bay on the screen. There is a courier ship in Bay 4. It is fast, stealth-capable. Stealing a royal ship is treason, Lyra said. A small smile touched her lips. It is a capital offense. So is kidnapping a princess, Jace said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. I am not being kidnapped, Lyra said softly. I am running away. Jace pulled the drive from the console. He checked the charge on his pistol. He checked the agonizing throb in his shoulder and pushed it into a box in his mind labeled ignore. Then let's be traitors, Jace said. He offered her his arm. Lyra took it, together. They turned away from the safety of the shadows and ran toward the hangar bay, leaving the Empire and their old lives behind them. The sirens of the Visara crown screamed a rhythmic, artificial panic that vibrated through the deck plates. It was the standard frequency for a catastrophic hull breach simulation, a sound designed to bypass logic and trigger pure flight instinct. Jace moved through the chaos of the royal hangar like a shark in a school of panicked fish. He had triggered the alarm 90 seconds ago using a looped command in the environmental control subsystem. And now the hangar deck was a mess of running mechanics, confused pilots, and flashing warning strobes. Stay close, Jace growled over his shoulder. He was limping slightly, his cybernetic shoulder grinding with every step, but his grip on his pistol was steady inside his jacket pocket. Lyra was right behind him. She had discarded the heavy, jewel-encrusted outer layers of her gala gown, leaving her in the shimmering, body-hugging undersuit. She looked less like a princess and more like a fugitive, but she knew exactly how to play the role she needed. They reached the security cordon for the VIP flight deck. A harried flight officer, his uniform disheveled, stepped in front of them, holding up a data pad. Halt! This sector is locked down for emergency extraction protocols, the officer shouted over the din. No unauthorized personnel. Lyra stepped forward before Jace could draw his weapon. She drew herself up to her full height, her bioluminescent markings flaring a blinding, imperious white. Do I look unauthorized to you, Lieutenant? She snapped. Her voice was not the soft tone she used with Jace. It was the razor-sharp command of the Imperial air. The officer blinked, recognizing the face that was plastered on every credit chip in the sector. Your Highness, we were not informed you were evacuating. The protocols say the station is venting atmosphere, Lyra shouted him down, injecting a perfect tremor of terrified entitlement into her voice. My security detail has been separated. This technician is escorting me to my private courier. Unless you want to explain to my father why his daughter suffocated while you checked a manifest, You will open this gate." The officer paled. He looked at the chaos behind him, then at the furious princess. He swiped his clearance card. "Go! Go! Clear the lane!" Jace didn't wait. He grabbed Lyra's arm and hauled her through the gate, sprinting toward the sleek, matte black shape of the courier ship docked in Bay 4. It was a Void Dancer-class vessel, built for speed and stealth, engines oversized for its frame. Jace slapped his palm against the biolock. He had already spoofed the biometric key using the data he stole from the security hub. The ramp hissed down. "Strap in!" Jace yelled, shoving her toward the co-pilot seat as he vaulted into the pilot's cradle. He jacked his interface cable directly into the ship's nav computer, his mind flooded with the ship's telemetry, fuel pressure, reactor output, shield harmonics. It was a relief to be part of a machine again. Machines made sense. People did not. Lyra scrambled into the harness next to him. "I have never stolen a ship before," she said, her voice breathless. "Is it supposed to take this long to start?" Jace ignored her. He fired the thrusters before the docking clamps fully disengaged. Metal screamed against metal as the ship tore itself free, lurching forward. "Hanging on might be a good idea," Jace shouted. He punched the throttle. The ship shot out of the magnetic field of the hangar bay and into the void. They were not alone. 3 patrol drones, automated hunter-killers shaped like obsidian teardrops, peeled off from the station's perimeter. Their targeting sensors lit up the Void Dancer's dashboard in angry crimson. "They are locking on!" Lyra shrieked, her hands gripping the armrests so hard her knuckles turned silver. Jace didn't blink. He felt the ship as an extension of his own nervous system. "I see them." He didn't fly straight. He dove. He threw the ship into a spiraling descent toward the gas giant's gravity well. The G-force slammed them into their seats. The hull groaned. The drones followed, firing pulses of coherent plasma that sizzled past their shields. Jace yanked the controls hard to the left, putting the ship into a roll that skimmed the edge of the station's debris field, a graveyard of old satellites and construction waste. "Are you insane?" Lyra yelled, watching a chunk of durasteel the size of a house whip past the canopy. "Predictable pilots get shot," Jace roared back. He wove through the debris field with a terrifying precision. He clipped the edge of a solar array, sending showers of sparks cascading over the windshield. He spun the ship through a gap between 2 derelict freighters that looked too small to fit a person, let alone a starship. Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, letting out a sound that was half scream, half laugh. It was the sound of absolute terror mixing with the wildest rush of adrenaline she had ever felt. Jace pulled up, skipping off the atmosphere of the gas giant to slingshot them away from the station. The sudden acceleration pinned them down, crushing the air from their lungs. Then silence. The stars settled into steady streaks. The proximity alarms died. The drones, unable to navigate the debris field at speed, had fallen behind. Jace slumped back in the pilot's cradle, sweat dripping from his nose. His cybernetic arm twitched involuntarily, a spasm of overused servos. "We are clear," Jace rasped. Lyra opened one eye, then the other. She looked out at the star field, then at Jace. Her chest was heaving. A smile, wild and unhinged, broke across her face. That was... She gasped, trying to find the word. That was horrible. "Do it again." Jace looked at her and laughed. A rough, rusty sound. "Not today. Princess, we need to disappear before they launch the long-range interceptors." He keyed in a set of coordinates that did not exist on any official Imperial chart. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked, watching the nav computer display a sector marked with warning runes. "Mirith's wound," Jace said. It is a rogue planet inside a living nebula. The ionization scrambles sensors. No one goes there. Why? Lyra asked. Because legends say the planet eats your mind, Jace said, engaging the hyperdrive. But I will take a haunted planet over your fiancé any day. Mirith's wound was not a planet. It was a bruise on the face of the universe. The nebula that surrounded it was a swirling soup of violet and sickly green gases that seemed to move with intent, coiling around the ship like tendrils of smoke. The sensors screamed static. The comms were dead. Jace brought the ship down on the planet's surface, fighting a magnetic storm that tried to wrestle the controls from his hands. They landed hard in a clearing surrounded by towering, twisted trees that glowed with a faint, rhythmic bioluminescence. The ship settled with a groan. Steam hissed from the landing struts. Jace unbuckled his harness. We are grounded. The ionization coil is fried. We need to make repairs before we can jump again. They stepped out onto the surface. The air was breathable but thick, tasting of copper and heavy. Sweet pollen. The forest around them was a nightmare of beauty. The trees had bark that looked like obsidian glass, and the leaves were translucent membranes that pulsed with light. As Jace walked, the moss beneath his boots flared brighter, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. Don't touch anything, Jace warned, his hand hovering near his pistol. I hear them, Lyra whispered. She was standing still, her head tilted. Her eyes were unfocused. Hear who? Jace asked, scanning the perimeter. The trees, she said. Not words, just feelings, hunger, curiosity, sorrow. She looked at Jace. The planet, it is loud. Over the next 2 days, the planet proved to be more than just loud. It was intrusive. The atmosphere was saturated with psychoreactive spores that bypassed filters and settled directly into the blood. It did not create emotions. It amplified them. Small annoyances became blinding rages. Jace dropped a wrench while working on the engine and nearly put his fist through the hull in frustration. Lyra tripped over a cable and burst into tears that she couldn't stop for an hour. The tension between them, already pulled taut by the escape, began to vibrate at a dangerous frequency. Why are you looking at me like that? Lyra snapped on the second evening. She was sitting by the small fire they had built, trying to clean the soot from her face. Like what? Jace grunted. He was stripping a wire, his movements jerky and aggressive. Like I am a puzzle you cannot solve and it is making you angry, Lyra said. Her voice rose. Like you regret bringing me. I regret crashing on a psychedelic rock, Jace shot back. I do not regret you, but you are making it hard to focus when you pace back and forth like a caged cat. I am a caged cat, Lyra shouted, standing up. That is my entire life. Jace, cages. First the palace, now this ship, now this forest. Maybe I want to pace. Jace threw the wire down. Then go pace in the woods. I might, Lyra yelled. She stormed toward him, intending to push past him, but as she brushed against his arm, a spark, visible and blue, jumped between them. They both gasped, jumping back. It wasn't static. It was a physical manifestation of the tension. Jace grabbed his arm. His implants were glitching, sending phantom pain signals shooting up his neck. It hurts, Jace hissed through his teeth. Lyra stared at him, her chest heaving. Her markings were swirling in chaotic patterns, faster than he had ever seen. Everything hurts here, she whispered. Being near you, it burns, because I want to touch you and I am terrified that if I do, I will shatter. Jace looked at her, the anger draining away, replaced by a raw, aching need that the planet magnified tenfold. Then shatter, he said. He stepped toward her, but the sky ripped open. It wasn't rain. It was light. A storm of psychic energy rolled over the horizon, turning the violet sky a bruising black. Lightning that looked like jagged tears in reality struck the ground. Not with thunder, but with a sound like a choir screaming. "Get inside," Jace yelled. They ran. Not to the ship. The electronics were sparking dangerously, but to a crumbling stone ruin they had found at the edge of the clearing. It looked like the remains of a temple, half swallowed by the glowing vines. They scrambled under the shelter of a leaning stone archway just as the storm broke overhead. The air inside the ruin was heavy, vibrating with power. The psychic pressure slammed into them. Jace fell to his knees, clutching his head. "Incoming fire," his mind screamed. "Sector 4 is overrun. They are slaughtering the civilians." He wasn't in the ruin anymore. He was back on the mud moon of the border wars. He could smell the burning meat. He could see the faces of the men he had ordered to their deaths. They were reaching for him, their hands skeletal and accusing. "No," Jace groaned, curling into a ball. Not real, not real. Beside him, Lyra screamed. She was not seeing war. She was seeing silence. She saw herself seated on a throne of ice, her mouth sewn shut with golden thread. Thousands of people were bowing to her, but she couldn't move. Chains made of heavy diamonds were wrapped around her throat, choking her. She was a doll. She was a thing. "Stop looking at me," Lyra cried out to the empty air, clawing at her throat. "I am a person. I am real." The hallucinations swirled, feeding on their deepest fears, amplifying them until reality dissolved. Jace forced his eyes open. He saw Lyra flailing, fighting invisible chains. He saw the terror on her face. He had to anchor her. He crawled forward, fighting the phantom soldiers that grabbed at his legs. He reached out and grabbed Lyra's hands. "Lyra! Look at me!" Jace roared. Lyra gasped, her eyes snapping to his face. The contact broke the loop for a second. "Jace," she whimpered. "The chains." "There are no chains," Jace said, his voice shaking. "Just us." He pulled her down until they were sitting face to face, knees touching. "Ground me," Jace said, "and I will ground you." He pressed his palms against hers. He leaned forward until their foreheads rested against each other. "Breathe," Jace commanded. "Match my breath. In. Out." Lyra shuddered, inhaling shakily. She focused on the physical sensation of his skin against hers. His hands were calloused, warm, and real. She closed her eyes and did something she had never dared to do with anyone. She lowered her mental shields. She let her telepathic senses, usually kept tightly reined, flow out and brush against his mind. It was like stepping into a blast furnace. She felt his guilt. It was a physical weight, a black tar that coated his soul. She felt his belief that he was broken, that he was a weapon that had outlived its war, that he was too stained by blood to ever touch anything pure without ruining it. "I am poison," his mind whispered. Lyra tightened her grip on his hands. "You are not poison," she projected back. "You are the antidote." Jace gasped as her mind touched his. He didn't have telepathy, but the planet's atmosphere acted as a conduit. He felt her. He felt the cold, echoing loneliness of her life. He felt the fury of being an object. He felt the exhaustion of being perfect. And beneath it all, he felt a small, terrified hope that he was the one person who saw the cracks in the porcelain and didn't look away. The connection deepened. The walls came down. Tears leaked from Jace's eyes, mixing with the sweat on his face. He started to laugh, a broken, shaky sound. "I used to collect antique poetry books," Jace confessed, the words tumbling out, "because I wanted to believe there were words for things other than kill confirmations. I never told anyone. I thought it made me soft. Lyra let out a wet, sobbing laugh. I hate the color purple. It is the royal color. I have worn it every day for 20 years. I want to burn every purple dress in the galaxy. I am afraid of the dark, Jace whispered. A soldier who is afraid of the dark. I am afraid of being forgotten, Lyra whispered back. The confessions flowed between them, dissolving the fear, dissolving the hallucinations. They were stripping each other bare, not of clothes, but of the armor they had worn for a lifetime. The storm outside crescendos, the ruin trembling around them. The energy in the air shifted. The terror evaporated, replaced by a sudden blinding clarity. They were alive. They were together, and nothing else mattered. Lyra opened her eyes. They were violet fires in the dark. She didn't speak. She grabbed his face with both hands and pulled him to her. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It was hungry, desperate, tasting of the ozone in the air and the salt of their tears. Jace made a sound low in his throat. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her so close there was no air left between them. His hands tangled in her hair, fingers threading through the delicate ridges at the base of her horns. Lyra gasped into his mouth, her body arching into him. The sensation of him touching her horns, a zone of intense sensitivity she hid from everyone, sent a shockwave of pleasure through her that nearly stopped her heart. Jace, she breathed against his lips. Don't stop, Jace growled. The line between we shouldn't and we can't not didn't just blur. It vanished. Hands roamed over survival suits and flight gear. Bodies pressed together against the cold stone floor. It was a frantic, worshipful exploration. They moved together with a mix of reverence and ravenous need, trying to physically merge, to erase the space between human and alien, between princess and soldier. There was no politics here. There was no rank. There was only the heat of their skin, the beat of their hearts, and the storm raging outside that was nothing compared to the storm inside them. The storm passed. The silence that followed was profound. They lay tangled together under a pile of thermal blankets Jace had retrieved from the emergency pack. The glow of the bioluminescent moss cast long, soft shadows across the interior of the ruin. Lyra lay with her head on Jace's chest, her finger tracing the raised keloid scars that mapped his torso. "This one?" she asked softly. "Shrapnel," Jace rumbled, his arm draped protectively over her. "Vaxis Prime." "And this one?" She traced a jagged line over his ribs. "Knife fight. Overly ambitious smuggler in a bar on Theta Station." Lyra rested her hand flat over his heart. "Maps," she murmured. "They are maps to the places you survived so you could get here." "To me?" Jace looked down at her. Her markings were dim now, pulsing with a slow, contented rhythm. He brushed a stray lock of silver hair from her face. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," Jace said. Lyra looked up, surprised. "Me?" "I scream when we fly through debris fields." "You chose to leave the cage," Jace said seriously. "I fought because I was ordered to. You are fighting because you believe in something better. That is real courage." Lyra was quiet for a moment. She looked at the stone ceiling. "What happens if we win?" "Jace," she asked softly, "if we actually stop Kale, if we fix the Empire, then you rebuild," Jace said. "And you?" Lyra asked. "Is there a place for a broken human veteran in a rebuilt Empire?" Jace tightened his arm around her. "I do not know about the Empire, but I am not going anywhere unless you tell me to." "We are partners," Lyra said firmly. "Not queen and subject. Partners." "Partners," Jace agreed. Lyra shifted, propping her chin on his chest. Her expression turned serious, the humor fading. Jace, earlier. When we... Yeah? Everyone who has ever touched me, Lyra said, her voice small, did it because they owned a piece of me. The handmaidens because they were paid. The doctors because I was an asset to be maintained. Kale. Because he thought he bought the rights. She looked him in the eye. I never knew what it felt like to be touched because someone just wanted to. Jace felt a surge of protective anger so hot it nearly burned him. He reached up, cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "Listen to me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "With me, you always have the vote. You say stop, we stop. You say go, we go. You change your mind halfway through. We stop. You own your body. Lyra. No one else. Not the Empire. Not me." Lyra's eyes filled with tears. She leaned into his hand, closing her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "And Jace? Yeah? I never want to stop." She kissed his palm, a soft, lingering touch that sealed the promise better than any legal contract. The sun rose on Mirith's wound, bathing the violet forest in a golden haze. The madness of the atmosphere seemed to have burned itself out with the storm, leaving the air crisp and clear. They worked on the ship together. It was different now. The tension was gone, replaced by a seamless, intuitive rhythm. "Pass the hydro spanner," Lyra said, hanging upside down from the intake valve. "Here," Jace said, handing it up to her. "Watch the flux coupler." "I know how to watch a flux coupler, grease monkey," she teased, grinning at him. Jace smiled back. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes. "We need a biosealant for the primary cooling line," Jace said, inspecting a cracked hose. "We are out of synthetic patch." Lyra looked at the forest. She walked over to one of the large, pulsing pitcher plants. She placed her hand on its stem, closing her eyes. She didn't speak, but she projected an image of the ship, of their need, of gratitude. The plant shuddered, slowly. It tilted its bloom, dripping a thick resinous sap into a container Lyra held out. "Thank you," she whispered to the plant. She walked back to Jace, holding the jar. "Alien biotech," she said smugly, "courtesy of the locals." Jace shook his head, amazed. "Remind me never to play poker with you. You can charm a plant. We patch the ship. We fly," Lyra said. Before they packed the final gear, Jace climbed the ridge to scan the horizon one last time. He found something half buried in the moss. It was a metallic spire, ancient and rusted. "Lyra!" Jace called. She scrambled up the ridge. "What is it?" "Old survey tech," Jace said, brushing off the moss. "Imperial. From the first expansion era, it is a relay station." "Is it active?" "The core is dead," Jace said, popping the panel. "But the dish is passive. It is still listening to the subspace frequencies." He pulled a cable from his belt and jacked it into the relay. "I can bounce a signal off this," Jace said, his eyes widening as he read the data. "It connects to the deep space buoy network. It is a back door into the Imperial broadcast channels." Lyra grabbed his arm. "Can we broadcast the evidence from here?" "No," Jace said. "The bandwidth is too low. It would take weeks to upload the files. Kale would trace it and nuke the site from orbit before we finished." Lyra's shoulders slumped. "But," Jace continued, a plan forming in his eyes, "we can use it to ping the network. We can see the schedule." He typed a command. A holographic calendar projected from his wrist. 3 days, Jace said. "The coronation. Kale is moving up the timeline. He is going to crown you, or a hologram of you, in 3 days." Lyra stared at the date. "The entire Empire will be watching. Every screen, every ship." Jace looked at her. "If we are in the capital, inside the ring, and we hijack the signal at the source, We can broadcast the truth to everyone." Lyra finished. At the exact moment he tries to take the crown. "It is suicide," Jace said. "We have to sneak back into the most heavily guarded station in the galaxy, infiltrate the ceremony, and hack the feed while surrounded by an army." Lyra smiled. It was the smile of the woman who had survived the storm. "We have a stealth ship," she said, "and we have a technician who knows the vents, and a princess who can charm the plants," Jace added. He took her hand. "Let's go crash a wedding." They turned and walked back to the ship, leaving the haunted planet behind, ready to burn down the old world to build a new one. The Void Dancer slid into the traffic queue for the Visara crown like a wolf donning sheep's clothing. Jace kept his hand near the transponder controls, watching the authentication lights flicker on the dashboard. They were broadcasting the stolen identity of one of Lord Kale's personal courier vessels, a ship listed in the registry as the Gilded Hawk, returning early from a deep sector patrol. If the codes were even a day out of date, the orbital defense cannons, which were currently tracking them with cold, automated precision, would turn them into expanding vapor. "Keep your heart rate down," Jace murmured, his eyes scanning the shield harmonics. "The bioscanners can read pulse spikes through the hull if they focus hard enough." "I am perfectly calm," Lyra said from the co-pilot seat. Jace glanced at her. She was gripping the armrests so tightly that the leather was groaning. Her bioluminescence, usually a chaotic swirl when she was stressed, was currently dialed down to a flat, almost invisible gray, a feat of supreme physical control she had practiced for hours during the flight back. "Access granted," the console chirped. "Welcome home. Gilded Hawk. Proceed to Docking Bay 7 Alpha. Priority clearance." Jace exhaled, the sound rushing out of him. "We are in." The Visara crown had changed in the week they had been gone. As they glided past the outer pylons, Jace saw the difference. The usual chaotic bustle of commercial traffic was gone, replaced by rigid patrol formations of heavy frigates. The advertising holograms that usually sold luxury goods and dream vacations had been scrubbed. Now, there was only one face in the sky. A massive 300-foot holographic projection of Lyra hovered over the station. In the image, she looked solemn, tragic, and resolute. A scrolling banner beneath her face read, "Unity through sacrifice, order through strength. The coronation approaches." Lyra stared at her own face, her expression twisting in disgust. "They made me look dead," she whispered, "like a martyr who is still walking." "That is the point," Jace said, maneuvering the ship into the dark maw of the private docking bay. "Martyrs do not ask questions, they just inspire obedience." They docked with a heavy metallic clank. Jace killed the engines. "Time to become someone else," he said. They moved to the cargo hold where they had prepped their gear. Jace pulled on a heavy, battered suit of mercenary armor they had scavenged from the ship's locker. Scuffed black plastoid, a helmet with a cracked visor, and a heavy blaster rifle slung across his back. He looked like every other gun for hire in the galaxy, dangerous, anonymous, and cheap. Lyra's transformation was more subtle but more jarring. She fastened a facial morph-tech emitter to her collar. With a soft hum, the device projected a localized distortion field over her features. Her high cheekbones softened, her nose broadened, and most importantly, her glowing markings and horns were digitally erased from the visual spectrum of anyone looking at her. To the naked eye, she was a plain, flat-faced human woman in a rough woolen cloak. She looked in the reflective surface of the airlock door. She touched her face, her fingers passing through the illusion. "It is strange," she murmured, "to look in a mirror and see a stranger." "Does it hurt?" Jace asked, adjusting his gauntlets. Lyra turned to him, a dry, dark smile touching her disguised lips. It feels entirely freeing. Jace, for the first time in 20 years, I am no one. I could walk into a bar and no one would offer me a seat. It is wonderful. Let's hope the anonymity lasts, Jace said. He handed her a small, concealed stun baton. Keep this in your sleeve. If things go wrong, do not hesitate. I am done hesitating, Lyra said, sliding the weapon into her cloak. They descended the ramp into the bay. It was quiet, staffed only by loader drones and a single sleepy logistics officer who barely looked up from his data pad as Jace flashed a high-level clearance badge he had forged during the flight. They moved quickly, avoiding the main concourse. Jace led her toward the service levels, the guts of the station where the air scrubbers and waste recyclers hummed. We need to get to the core, Jace said, checking the schematic on his HUD. I have a contact in sanitation. Old guy named Ren. He owes me a favor for fixing his gambling debts last year. He can get us into the maintenance shafts that run parallel to the throne room. They found Ren in a sub-basement processing center. The old man, a four-armed species with leathery skin, nearly dropped his wrench when Jace took off his helmet. You are dead, Ren hissed, looking around frantically. The news feeds say you kidnapped the princess and vaporized yourself in a plasma storm. The news feeds exaggerate, Jace said. We need access to the primary conduit. Ren, the vertical shaft behind the Grand Hall. Ren looked at the cloaked figure beside Jace. Who is this? Another ghost? Lyra lowered her hood. She didn't turn off the morph tech, but she spoke with that undeniable bell-clear tone of command. I am the reason you are going to open the door, citizen, she said. Unless you prefer the current security forces, who I hear are cutting rations and doubling shifts. Ren squinted at her, sensing the authority beneath the plain face. He spat on the floor. Fine. But if you get caught, I never saw you. I was fixing a toilet on level 4. He unlocked the heavy blast door to the service tunnels. The tunnels were a nightmare of claustrophobia. They were designed for repair drones, not people. Jace and Lyra had to crawl single file through conduits that smelled of ozone and stale grease. Jace went first, pulling himself along with his elbows. His broad shoulders scraped against the sides of the tube. We are stuck. Jace grunted, wedged tight in a 90-degree turn. My armor plating. It is catching on the rivets. Lyra, crawling behind him, poked his boot. Suck it in, hero, she whispered, her voice laced with amusement despite the danger. This is what happens when you carry the weight of the world on those shoulders. They get too big for the plumbing. I am glad my imminent asphyxiation is amusing to you, Jace wheezed, straining to twist his body. Just pull, Lyra said. Or do I need to charm the tunnel like I charmed the plants? She grabbed his ankle and shoved. With a metallic screech of scraping plastoid, Jace popped through the constriction and tumbled into the wider vertical shaft. Lyra slid out gracefully behind him, dusting off her cloak. See? Lyra said, smirking. Teamwork. Jace checked his armor. He had lost a pauldron, but he was alive. We are here. They were standing on a great platform suspended over the abyss of the station's central reactor core. Above them, a ladder stretched up into the darkness toward the palace network core. They climbed for 20 minutes in silence. When they reached the access hatch to the server room, Jace jacked his interface directly into the lock. We have 10 minutes before the shift change, Jace said. The door hissed open. The server room was a forest of blinking lights and humming cooling towers. It was the brain of the Visara crown. Jace moved to the primary console. He didn't sit, he stood, plugging his neural link into the mainframe. His eyes rolled back for a second as he merged with the data stream. "I am in," he said, his voice distant. "I am queuing the upload, the audio files, the video of the war room, the schematics of the coup." He worked fast, his hands blurring over the haptic keys. "I am setting a trigger," Jace explained. "The broadcast relay is linked to the ceremonial microphone on the dais. The moment the audio peaks, when the high priest asks for the vows, the signal will hijack every screen in the Empire." Lyra stood beside him, watching the data streams. "Add a live feed," she said. Jace paused, looking at her. "What?" "Add a camera feed from the dais," Lyra said firmly. "When the truth comes out, I do not want to be hiding in a ventilation shaft. I want to be standing there." "Lyra, no," Jace said, disconnecting from the stream to look at her. "That is suicide. Once the broadcast starts, Kale will panic. He will order his guards to open fire. You will be standing in the center of the kill zone. I have been a target my entire life." "Jace," Lyra said, her voice hard. "But I was always a target because of who my father was or who my husband would be. For once, I want to be a target because of what I am saying." She grabbed his shoulders. "If I am not there, if I do not claim this revolution, then I am just a victim. I need to be the leader." Jace looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes. Yes, but it was dwarfed by a fierce, blinding resolve. She was not asking for permission. She was telling him the plan. He sighed, a sound of terrifying resignation. "Fine," Jace said, "but I am coming with you." "You cannot," Lyra said. "You are a fugitive." "I am a mercenary," Jace said, tapping his disguised helmet. "And Lord Kale just hired extra security for the coronation. I will be on the dais, right behind you." The coronation hall was a blinding spectacle of gold and white. 10,000 guests filled the tiered seating. Nobles, governors, admirals. Above them, floating cameras beamed the event to trillions of citizens across the galaxy. Lyra stood in the anteroom, wearing the wedding gown. It was a magnificent, suffocating thing of heavy white silk and spun diamond chains. A veil covered her face, obscuring her expression. Her morph tech was off. She was the princess again. Jace stood by the door, anonymous in his black armor, his face hidden by the cracked visor. He gripped his blaster rifle, the weight of it familiar and reassuring. "It is time," a herald announced. Lyra walked out. The roar of the crowd was physical. It hit her like a wave. She walked down the long aisle, her head high, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She saw Kale waiting on the dais. He looked perfect, regal, triumphant. She reached the top of the stairs. Kale stepped forward and took her hand. His grip was not gentle. He squeezed her fingers, grinding the bones together until pain shot up her arm. He leaned in, smiling for the cameras. "You are trembling, my love," he whispered, his voice low and venomous. "Do not worry. If you stumble, I will drag you. And if you deviate from the script by even one word, I will find that technician of yours and I will peel him apart while you watch." Lyra looked at him through the veil. She didn't flinch. "You will try," she thought. The high priest, a towering figure in crimson robes, raised his staff. The crowd fell silent. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. "Lord Kale Theron," the priest intoned, his voice amplified to the ends of the station. "Do you pledge your life and your honor to the crown?" "I do," Kale said smoothly. "And do you, Princess Lyra Visara, pledge your obedience and your blood to this union?" Lyra took a breath. She felt Jace's presence behind her, a shadow in the guard line. She stepped toward the microphone. "Now." "Jace," she thought. Jace, watching the audio waveforms on his internal HUD, triggered the code. The speakers did not broadcast Lyra's voice. Instead, a harsh, static-laced recording boomed through the hall, deafening in its clarity. If she dies, she becomes a martyr, and I rule as avenger. Either way, the crown falls to me. The crowd gasped. It was Kale's voice, unmistakable. Kale froze, his smile shattered. He looked around, confused. "Cut the feed," he hissed, but the feed did not cut. Above the hall, the massive holographic projectors that were meant to show the wedding kiss flickered and changed. They showed the war room. They showed Kale pointing at a map of the civilian sectors. "Make it look messy." The recording continued. "I want panic. We need a justification for martial law." Panic rippled through the hall. The governors were standing up. The admirals were reaching for their sidearms. Lyra reached up and tore the veil from her head. She threw it to the floor. She raised her hand, the one Kale had been crushing. The bruise was already forming, dark and ugly against her silver skin. "He speaks of honor." Lyra's voice rang out, not from the speakers, but from her own throat, amplified by the sheer force of her rage. "But he plans murder." She turned to the cameras, to the galaxy. "Look at him." She pointed at Kale, who was stumbling back, pale with shock. "He orchestrated the attacks. He killed your families to buy himself a throne." Kale snapped. The facade vanished. His face twisted into a mask of pure animal fury. "Kill her," he screamed, pointing at Lyra. "She is lying. She is a traitor. Kill her now." The royal guard hesitated. They looked at the recordings playing in the sky. They looked at their princess. But Kale's personal mercenaries did not hesitate. 3 of them on the lower steps raised their rifles. "No!" The shout came from the black-armored guard behind Lyra. Jace moved. He didn't fire. There wasn't time. He launched himself forward, diving in front of Lyra just as the mercenaries pulled their triggers. 3 plasma bolts struck him. 2 hit his chest plate, slagging the armor but holding. The 3rd hit his abdomen, finding the gap between the plating. The impact lifted Jace off his feet. He slammed into Lyra, knocking her down. They hit the marble floor of the dais in a tangle of white silk and scorched black metal. Chaos erupted. The hall turned into a war zone. Loyalists fired on the mercenaries. Guests screamed and stampeded toward the exits. "Jace!" Lyra screamed. She scrambled up, pulling him into her lap. His armor was smoking. Blood, bright red and alarmingly fast, was soaking into her white dress. Jace groaned, his hand clutching the wound. He coughed, and blood speckled his visor. He ripped the helmet off, gasping for air. His face was pale, sweat-streaked. He wheezed, trying to smile. "That really hurt. You idiot." Lyra was crying, her hands pressing frantically against the wound. You promised you wouldn't die." "I am not dead," Jace gritted out. "I am just rethinking my career choices. I really preferred fixing air filters." He tried to sit up, raising his blaster with a shaking hand. He fired a blind shot over the dais, forcing a mercenary to duck. "We need to move," Jace gasped. Lyra looked around. Kale was retreating toward the rear exit, surrounded by a knot of elite guards. He was getting away. She looked down at Jace. He was fading. Lyra closed her eyes for a split second. She reached out with her mind, not to the plants, but to the machine. She felt the palace network, the one Jace had hacked. She felt the defense drones hovering near the ceiling, currently in standby mode because of the confusion. She grabbed the portable interface Jace had dropped. She jammed the connector into the port behind her ear. Connect! Her mind slammed into the drone network. It was cold, sharp, logical. Target, hostiles. She commanded, Non-lethal. Suppression only. Protect the civilians. Above the hall, 50 security drones woke up. Their lights turned from amber to blue. They swooped down like a swarm of angry insects. They didn't fire bullets. They fired stun pulses. The mercenaries aiming at the dais dropped, convulsing. The drones formed a protective wall around the fleeing guests, shielding them from the crossfire. Jace watched, his eyes widening. Nice. Shooting. Princess. Lyra disconnected the cable. She grabbed Jace's arm, hauling him up. He cried out, his legs buckling, but he locked his knees and stood. He is running, Lyra said, pointing at Kale's retreating back. We finish this, Jace said, supported by Lyra, his blood trailing on the pristine floor. Jace hobbled after her. They moved through the back corridors, following the sounds of Kale's retreat. They burst into the private shuttle bay just as Kale was keying the ramp to his personal escape craft. He was alone. His guards had been cut off by the drones. Kyle, Lyra shouted. Kale spun around. He held a heavy blaster pistol. His eyes were wild, the eyes of a rat in a corner. He saw them, the bleeding mercenary and the princess in the ruined, blood-stained wedding dress. Stay back, Kyle screamed. He aimed the gun at Lyra. Jace shoved Lyra behind him, staggering. He raised his own rifle, but his arm was shaking too badly to aim. Drop it, Kale, Jace growled. It is over. The galaxy knows. It is not over until I say it is, Kale yelled. He fired. The shot went wide, hitting a fuel canister. Steam erupted. In the confusion, Kale lunged. He didn't go for the ship. He went for Jace. He knew Jace was the weak link. He knew Jace could barely stand. Kale slammed into Jace, knocking the rifle away. He grabbed Jace by the throat and spun him around, jamming the barrel of his pistol against Jace's temple. Drop it! Kale shrieked at Lyra. Lyra froze. She stood 10 feet away, her hands empty, her chest heaving. Let him go, she said, her voice deadly quiet. Recant, Kale demanded, tightening his grip on Jace's throat. Go to the intercom. Tell them it was a lie. Tell them the recording was faked. Tell them you are hysterical, or I will paint the wall with his brains. Jace's eyes met Lyra's. He was choking, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Do not do it, he mouthed. Lyra looked at Kyle. She saw the fear in him. She saw the cowardice. He is bluffing, Lyra said. Kyle laughed, a high, manic sound. Try me, I have nothing left to lose. You have your vanity, Lyra said. She took a step forward. Stop, Kale screamed. You want to kill him? Lyra asked, her voice rising. Do it. Pull the trigger. And then what? Kale, you are alone in a locked room with me, and I promise you, if you kill the only man who truly sees me, I will tear you apart with my bare hands. She stepped closer. Her markings flared blinding white. Her horns seemed to grow sharper in the harsh light. She looked like a demon of vengeance. The galaxy is watching. Kyle, do you want to die a monster, or do you want to surrender like a lord? Kale hesitated. His eyes darted from Lyra to the door. The distraction was minuscule, but it was enough. Jace moved. He ignored the gun at his head. He ignored the hole in his gut. He stomped down hard on Kale's instep with his armored boot and twisted his body, driving his cybernetic elbow back into Kale's ribs. Bone crunched. Kale screamed, the gun firing wildly into the ceiling. He staggered back, releasing Jace. Jace collapsed, his legs finally giving out. Kale raised the gun again, aiming at the fallen man. He never pulled the trigger. Lyra was already moving. She grabbed a heavy stun staff from a weapon rack on the wall. She swung it with all the torque of her body, a perfect arc of kinetic fury. The staff connected with Kale's jaw. There was a sickening crack. Kale spun through the air and hit the deck plates face down. He didn't move. Lyra stood over him, chest heaving, the staff still humming in her hands. "It is over," she whispered. The doors to the shuttle bay burst open. Palace security, the loyal ones, stormed in, weapons raised. They saw the unconscious lord, the bleeding mercenary, and the princess standing victorious. They lowered their weapons. "Medic!" Lyra screamed, dropping the staff and falling to her knees beside Jace. Jace was lying on his back. His skin was gray. His breath was coming in shallow, wet rasps. "Hey, princess," he whispered. His eyes were unfocused. "Did we win?" "We won," Lyra sobbed, pressing her hands over his wound, trying to stem the flow of blood. "We won. Jace, stay with me." Jace smiled. "It was a weak, fading thing. I told you. I am not going anywhere." His eyes rolled back. His head lolled to the side. "No!" Lyra shrieked. Medics rushed in, surrounding them. They tried to pull Lyra away to get to the patient. "Your Highness, please, step back," a medic urged. Lyra shoved him away, her hands stained crimson with Jace's blood. She grabbed Jace's limp hand, interlocking their fingers. "I am not leaving him," she shouted, her voice breaking with a primal ferocity that silenced the room. "If he dies, I will burn this empire to the ash. Save him." She bent over him, pressing her forehead to his, whispering into the silence. "Don't leave," she begged, echoing the words that had started it all. "Don't leave." The world dissolved into the frantic beep of monitors and the shouting of doctors. But Lyra held on, an anchor refusing to let her soldier drift away into the dark. Jace floated in a warm, fluid darkness. It wasn't the cold void of space nor the muddy trench of a battlefield. It was a suspended state, soft and rhythmic. Slowly, sensation returned, the hum of machinery, the scent of antiseptic and lilies, the phantom ache in his side that was dull now, buried under layers of advanced analgesics. He opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was a dome of artificial starlight, the constellations slow spinning and unfamiliar. He blinked, his vision blurry, trying to piece together where he was. He turned his head. Lyra was there. She was curled into a high-backed medical chair that looked painfully uncomfortable. She was wearing a simple gray tunic, her hair loose and messy around her shoulders. Her face was pale, devoid of makeup, her markings dim and still. She was asleep, her breathing shallow and even, but her hand, her slender silver lilac hand, was wrapped around his wrist with a grip that looked like it hadn't loosened in days. Jace tried to move his fingers when the movement was small, barely a twitch, but Lyra woke instantly. She gasped, sitting up so fast the chair skidded on the floor, her eyes wide and violet, locked onto his. "Jace?" she whispered. "Hey, princess," Jace rasped. His voice sounded like he had swallowed a bag of gravel. Lyra let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She lunged forward, not hugging him, but hovering over him, her hands hovering over his chest as if she wanted to touch him but was afraid he would break. "You idiot," she said. Her voice was shaking. "You absolute reckless, tactical disaster of a human being. You took 3 plasma bolts. 3! Do you know how much biogel we had to pump into you? You have more synthetic organ tissue than natural at this point." "I am durable," Jace wheezed, trying to shift his weight. "You are stupid," Lyra countered, tears spilling over her lashes. "You jumped in front of a firing squad. Who does that? You promised me we were partners. And then you decided to play hero and almost leave me alone in this mess." She was angry. She was terrified. She was beautiful. "You are not allowed." Jace coughed, wincing as his ribs protested. "What?" Lyra demanded, wiping her eyes furiously. Not allowed to what? Yell at you? I am the first speaker of the Empire. I can yell at whoever I want. You are not allowed to look that beautiful when you are yelling at a patient, Jace finished, a weak grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. It is against hospital regulations. Lyra froze. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing. Then she let out a wet, incredulous laugh and collapsed onto the side of the bed, burying her face in his neck. I hate you, she mumbled into his skin, her tears wetting his hospital gown. I hate you so much. Don't you ever scare me like that again. I am not going anywhere, Jace whispered, lifting his heavy hand to stroke her hair. I still have a job to do. Someone has to fix your wardrobe drones. Recovery was slow, but the world outside the med bay was moving at light speed. The Visara crown was in a state of controlled chaos. Kale's conspiracy had been ripped open for the galaxy to see. The recordings Jace and Lyra had broadcast were playing on loop in every system. Governors were resigning. Admirals were being arrested. The old council, terrified of the public backlash, was scrambling to distance themselves from the failed coup. Lyra was at the center of the storm. She refused the traditional coronation, the golden throne, the heavy crown, the oaths of fealty. She threw them all out. In the strategy meetings, which were now held in a functional briefing room rather than the opulent council chamber, Lyra was a force of nature. We are not doing a victory parade, Lyra said, cutting off a pompous Grand Duke who was suggesting a fleet review. We just had a civil war inside the palace. The people do not need to see battleships. They need to see bread distribution and lift the martial law protocols. But Your Highness, the Duke blustered. Tradition dictates. Tradition dictated I marry a man who planned to murder me. Lyra snapped. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. I was a decorated hostage in a very pretty dress for 20 years. Duke, I know exactly what tradition is worth. We are writing a new charter, one that limits my power, not expands it. She turned to Jace, who was sitting in the corner in a wheelchair wearing a fresh gray uniform. Technician Coven, Lyra said. What is your assessment of the sector security grid? The room went silent. The nobles looked at the human veteran with disdain. Jace cleared his throat. He felt out of place, but he saw Lyra's gaze, steady, demanding. The grid is porous, Jace said. The encryption is outdated. Kale's people used backdoors that have been there for a decade. If you want a secure government, you need to tear the digital infrastructure down and rebuild it. Open source, transparent, preposterous, the Duke sneered. We should listen to a mechanic on matters of state security? Lyra slammed her hand on the table. We will listen to the man who stopped the coup while you were hiding in your panic room, Lyra said coldly. Anyone who refuses to hear advice from someone who has actually seen the consequences of bad power should not be writing laws. The Duke sat down, his face purple. Jace looked at Lyra. She winked at him, a microscopic twitch of her eyelid. The scandal broke 3 days later. Tabloids across the Empire ran the story. The Princess and the Human. Images of Jace carrying her through the service tunnels, of her screaming for medics over his body, were splashed across every screen. The reaction was mixed. The old guard was horrified. A human, a commoner, a cripple. But the people, the workers in the orbital docks, the soldiers on the rim, the citizens who felt ignored, they loved it. Memes began to circulate. One showed Lyra hitting Kale with the stun staff with the caption, "Consensual governance applied." Another showed Jace looking tired with the caption, "When you just want to fix the AC but you accidentally topple a regime." Lyra showed Jace the memes on her datapad one evening in her private quarters. "Look at this one," she giggled, pointing to an image of her horns photoshopped onto a cat. The internet is a strange place. They call me the tactical janitor. Jace groaned, scrubbing a hand over his face. I will never live this down. Lyra laughed, the sound bright and unburdened. It is better than the inconvenient human. But the laughter masked the strain. They were tired. Jace was fighting his own insecurity. He was living in a palace where the spoons cost more than his childhood home. He had bodyguards now, 2 towering royal marines who followed him everywhere, making him feel like a prisoner in his own life. Lyra was exhausted. She was working 20-hour days, rewriting the Constitution, managing the famine relief, and trying to keep the military from fracturing. The explosion happened over dinner. Jace was picking at his food, some rare avian delicacy that tasted like rubber. Lyra was reading 3 data pads at once. You need to eat, Jace said. I am busy, Lyra mumbled. The Theta Sector is threatening to secede. The Theta Sector will still be there in 10 minutes, Jace said. Put the pad down. Lyra snapped her head up. Do not order me, Jace. I get enough orders from the council. I am not the council, Jace said, his voice rising. I am the guy watching you run yourself into an early grave. You are shaking. Lyra, look at your hands. I am fine, Lyra shouted, standing up. And I do not need you hovering over me like another bodyguard. I have enough shadows. I hover because I am worried. Jace stood up too, wincing as his side pulled. And maybe because I feel useless. You are running an empire. I am just... What? The boyfriend? The mascot? Is that what you think? Lyra asked, her voice turning icy. That you are a mascot. I do not belong here. Lyra, Jace yelled. Look at this room. Look at me. I am a grease monkey with a criminal record. Eventually, the novelty is going to wear off. You are going to wake up and realize you need a king, not a mechanic. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra stared at him. Her anger crumbled, revealing a naked, terrifying fear. Is that why you won't unpack? She whispered. Jace blinked. What? Your bag, Lyra said, pointing to the duffel bag in the corner of the room. You have been out of the med bay for a week. You haven't unpacked. You are ready to run. Jace looked at the bag. He hadn't even realized he'd done it. It was instinct. Always be ready to move. Always have an exit. I don't know, Jace admitted, his shoulders slumping. Lyra walked around the table. She stopped in front of him. She looked small without her robes, just a woman in a tunic with tired eyes. I am terrified. Jace, she confessed, her voice breaking. I am terrified that you will leave, that once the adrenaline fades, once there are no more assassins to shoot, you will realize that this life, the politics, the scrutiny, the noise, is too much, that you deserve a simpler life, a happy life. She reached out, grabbing the lapels of his uniform. I am terrified that I am too much trouble, she whispered. Jace looked at her. He saw the truth of it. She wasn't pushing him away because she didn't need him. She was pushing herself because she was afraid he would realize she was a burden. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into him. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of ozone and lilies. I don't want a simple life, Jace mumbled into her hair. I tried that. It was gray. It was empty. He pulled back to look at her. I want the trouble. Lyra, I want the arguments. I want the wardrobe malfunctions. I want to wake up every morning and wonder what kind of mess we are going to fix today. But you hate the palace. Lyra sniffed. I hate the drapes, Jace corrected, and the spoons. But I love the woman who lives here. Lyra's breath hitched. You love me? Jace smiled, a soft, crooked thing. I thought that was obvious when I fought a warlord with a broken arm. Yes. Princess, I love you." Lyra let out a sob and kissed him. It wasn't like the kiss in the ruin. That had been desperate, a collision of two people afraid of dying. This kiss was slow. It was deliberate. It was acclaiming. They sank onto the rug before the fire, tangling together. The room was warm, the light soft. There was no rush. Jace unbuttoned her tunic, his hands reverent. Lyra traced the line of his jaw, her touch feather-light. "Are you sure?" she whispered against his lips. "There is no going back. If you stay, I will never let you go." "Good," Jace growled. They explored each other with a focus that bordered on worship. Lyra's skin was soft, cool to the touch, her bioluminescence pulsing in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that matched his touch. Jace was rougher, scarred and warm, but his hands were gentle. They whispered confessions in the dark. "I snore," Jace warned her, kissing her throat. "I steal the blankets," Lyra countered, arching into his touch. "And I have cold feet." "I can fix that," Jace murmured. They laughed, soft, breathless sounds that broke the intensity. It felt like coming home. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. There was no fear here, only trust, only the profound relief of being seen, truly seen, and wanted anyway. Later, they lay under the projected ceiling of the room, which Lyra had changed to show the stars over Mirith's wound. Jace was on his back, one arm behind his head, the other holding Lyra, who was draped over him like a blanket. "I learned something," Lyra murmured, drawing patterns on his chest. "Yeah?" "Power without consent is just control," she said. "That is what Kale wanted. Control. He didn't care about the people, he just wanted to move the pieces. And love without listening is just hunger," Jace added. "I was trying to protect you by shutting you out. I thought I was being noble. I was just being stubborn." "We are both stubborn," Lyra said. "That is why we work." She propped herself up on her elbows. "I am dissolving the title of Empress," she said. Jace raised an eyebrow. "That is a big move. What are you going to be?" "First speaker," Lyra said. "I will share power. An elected senate. I will represent the crown, but I won't rule it. It is a partnership. Like us." "I like it," Jace said. "Citizen Lyra. And I have a role for you," she said, a playful glint in her eyes. "Oh no," Jace groaned. "I need a terrifying security consultant," she said. "Someone to stand next to me and look like he might bite the head off a diplomat if they get too close. And occasionally, be paraded around as eye candy." Jace snorted. "Eye candy? Me? I have a face like a smashed combat droid." "You have a face like a hero," Lyra said softly, tracing his scar. "Do you consent to being eye candy?" Jace pretended to think about it. "Only if the uniform is not purple. It is black," Lyra promised. "Then I accept." The great hall was packed again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. There were no armed guards lining the walls. The doors were open. The air smelled of fresh rain, not fear. Lyra stood on the dais. She wore a simple gown of white and silver, unadorned by jewels. Her hair was loose. Her horns were bare. Jace stood beside her, not behind her. Beside her. He wore a crisp black uniform with no medals, just the insignia of the first speaker's office. He stood at ease, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the crowd, not for threats, but with a quiet pride. Citizens of the Vesera systems. Lyra began. Her voice was unamplified, projecting clearly through the acoustics of the hall. "We are not here to celebrate a victory. We are here to acknowledge a failure. We let fear rule us for too long. We let silence be our language." She looked at Jace. He nodded. I was part of that silence, Lyra continued. I let myself be a symbol instead of a leader. But I learned that a symbol cannot bleed, and a symbol cannot love. And to rebuild this empire, we need to do both. She reached out and took Jace's hand. The crowd rippled with a murmur of surprise, then acceptance. This is Jace Coven, Lyra said. He is not a lord. He is not a prince. He is a man who challenged me when I was wrong, saved me when I fell, and refused to let me surrender. He is my partner, and together, we serve you. She raised their joined hands. For the first time in history, the applause was not polite. It was raucous. It was messy. It was real. Epilogue: The Star Weaver. A new diplomatic cruiser painted in white and silver sat in orbit, ready for its maiden voyage. Jace stood on the observation deck, watching the stars stretch out into infinity. He felt the hum of the engines beneath his feet, a sound he knew intimately now, not just as a mechanic but as a commander. We are cleared for departure. First speaker. The captain's voice came over the comms. Jace didn't turn. He was watching the reflection in the glass. Lyra walked onto the deck. She was holding a data pad, looking harried. The trade delegation from the mining guild is demanding a meeting before we jump. She sighed. Apparently, they are offended by the font size on the treaty. Tell them I will come down and adjust the font size with a hydro spanner, Jace said without turning around. Lyra laughed. That would cause a diplomatic incident. We are going to cause at least 3 diplomatic incidents on this trip anyway, Jace said. Might as well start early. Lyra walked up behind him. She started to turn away, heading for the door. I should go handle it. Jace watched her silhouette against the stars, the way the light caught the curve of her horns, the way she moved, purposeful and free. Lyra, he called out. She stopped. She turned back. What is it? Jace smiled. It wasn't the cynical smirk of the veteran. It was the open, tender smile of a man who had found his place. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her. Lyra paused. She remembered a dressing room, a broken console, a man who couldn't look away because he saw something real. A playful, tender smile spread across her face. She dropped the data pad on a chair. The mining guild could wait. She walked back to him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her chin on his chest. If you ever try to walk out of my life again without talking to me first, she whispered, looking up at him, I will personally hack your prosthetics so you can only walk in circles. Jace laughed, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through her chest. I am not running, princess, he promised, pulling her close. I am exactly where I want to be. For how long? She asked, testing him. For as long as you want me, Jace said. Lyra closed her eyes, leaning into him as the ship's drive engaged. The stars outside stretched into luminous lines of light, a bridge to 1,000 new worlds. Then we have a lot of work to do, she whispered. Jace kissed the top of her head. Let's get to work. They stood together, partners in love, in politics, and in the messy, beautiful future, as the ship jumped into the unknown.